Okay, opening the South Maui Community Plan Advisory Committee meeting at 5:30 p.m. and we'll start with a roll call as usual.
Chair Rob Weltman. Vice Chair Daniel Kanahele.
I'm here.
Tova Callender. Everett Dowling. Huanani Huddleston Haboka. That's right, excuse. Vernon Kalani Cow. Randolph Leach. Mike Moran. Cody Nemitz. Wayne Ishiki. Kiyoki Falter. Jennifer Sullivan. And Brian Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Vilina mai na lalo ki kumike o lala o ka ulo no ka papa ho lala no Maui hema. Vilina mai no ho I ka po e o ke ena ho lala o ka lana o Maui. Mai ka leho o Maui nei. E nana ho lohe kako ke yahiahi ki kahi ho ike I ka inahana no ka loa I na palapala ai no ke kukula hale. A mena ano ka li ka ole. A me hope hapai ai e hapai na haku aina nui o Maui hema I kona manao I pili ana I ke kukulu hale ana ma ko ako ko apana. So today we're going to be hearing a presentation from the Planning Department on the permitting process and concurrent zoning. Then we'll have a land user forum to hear the plans and proposals of our large landowners around housing in South Maui. And then after that, we'll take a break, and then we'll have public testimony on both parts. And then we'll resume after that, after the public testimony with discussion among ourselves and questions to the landowners and the Planning Department. And next week, we are going to hear another presentation. Then it will be on the new land use designations that are proposed for the community plan. And then we'll start work on our first land use sub-area, which is the Ma'alaya area. So at this time, Mike, you have your hand up?
Yes, Mr. Chair, can we have some technical assistance? It's very difficult to hear on this side. I thought it was my old ears, but
I see.
this young man
the
said...
speaker is directed right towards me, so I heard perfectly.
If we can adjust it a little bit.
Can we direct the speaker so it's more equitable? Let's see. Okay, hopefully that's better. Okay, so do we have our speaker from the Planning Department on the permitting process and concurrent zoning?
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the South Maui Community Plan Advisory Committee. My name is Danny Diaz. I'm a supervising planner in the current division of the Maui Planning Department. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this presentation to you folks this afternoon. Really quick about myself, I started working in the planning department about 18 years ago. Started in the current planning division, was there for almost 12 years. Took a supervisory position in our zoning administration and enforcement division for about 6 years, and about 8 months ago went back to the current planning division. So with that, we have a brief overview of what our division does and the types of permits that we process, and some information on the process that these permits go through. So the current division is responsible for administrative and discretionary permit processing. So the types of permits that we process are anywhere from SMA exemptions. So, this would be if you have a condo in the SMA area and you're going to, remodel a bathroom or something. That's something we would process, all the way up to minor and SMA major permits, state, county, special and conditional use permits that go before the Maui Planning Commission and or the Maui County Council. Also changes of zoning, community plan amendments. We also process state district boundary amendments, and with that, depending on the size of the property, it either goes before the Maui County Council for approval, or if it's over 15 acres, then we take it before the State Land Use Commission. And we also work on bed and breakfast and short-term rental home permits. We also process environmental assessments and environmental impact statements, and I'll speak about that later. And lastly, we also, process time extensions and amendments on existing permits. The current division staffs numerous boards and commissions. We staff the Maui Planning Commission and the commission's Hana, South Maui, and Paia Haiku advisory committees. We also staff and advise the Lanai and Molokai Planning Commissions, the Urban Design Review Board, and the Maui Redevelopment Agency. Briefly on the approval process, so there's basically, permits take two tracks. Either they can be approved administratively by the department, or it has to go in front of a board or commission or the county council for approval. So the permits that we can process in-house and approve in-house are minor permits, and generally these are permits that have little or no change in use or intensity. An example would be construction a deck on an existing commercial building or single-family residence. Permits that do have a change of use or intensity generally go through the Planning Commission for approval. And so with that, there is a public process, a process for notification, a process for the public to come and weigh in and give their opinion. So an example of this would be if somebody wanted to open a church in a single family dwelling, that would allow the neighbors or people around that area to come to a public hearing and weigh in on it, because obviously you're going to have increase in noise, increase in traffic, etc. And also changes of zoning or changes to the community plan, those go to the Planning Commission for a public hearing. Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the Maui County Council, and then ultimately the Maui County Council is the one that gives approval. And so also that includes a public process. So as you folks know, Maui County has a complex and multi-tiered land use regulatory system. We have state land use districts, which would be urban, agriculture, rural, conservation. We have the Maui Island plans, as you know, community plans, and also we have Maui County Code Title 19, which is our zoning code. There is also, as I mentioned earlier, environmental review. And then on top of that, there's other designations like special management area, historic districts, FEMA special flood hazard areas. And with all these layers, the general idea and objective is to encourage appropriate uses of land, conserve and stabilize property values, prevent uses that would be detrimental to existing uses, and lastly, promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. So, as you folks know, it works in layers, and each layer has its own regulations, and sometimes they work with each other and sometimes they don't. And generally, as you work your way down, it gets more and more restrictive. So state land use, urban, it's basically you can do almost anything in urban, but as you go down to the Maui Island plan, community plans, and then all the way to zoning, then it gets really specific on what's allowed. So for example, our zoning code, Title 19, it gets specific on, depending on what you're zoned, you're restricted to certain building heights, setbacks. When you're subdividing, there's a minimum lot size and lot widths. There's permitted uses, so principal uses that you're allowed to do outright without any permits. There's accessory permits where you have a principal use and you can do an accessory, but the accessory is accessory to the principal use, so that can't be your primary use. And then special uses, which you would need a special use permit for. Zoning also deals with density, requires landscaping, and also parking requirements. So here's some examples of zoning districts, and this is, let me use my pointer here. So this is where Queen Kahumanu Shopping Center is. This area here is where UH Maui College is, Maui Arts and Cultural Center. So just in that little area, you can see multiple zoning designations. There's park, R2 residential, M1 light industrial, M2 heavy industrial hotel, P1 public, quasi-public. Ultimately, the Maui County Council has authority over changes in zoning and also for changing the code. So for example, Maui Arts and Cultural Center here, it's zoned park, and I assume, 30 plus years ago when that project was new, the MAC had two options, right? Either you change your zoning from park to something else, or you change the zoning code in park to allow for a use like that. So if you look at Title 19 under parks, a permitted use is cultural and performing arts facilities. So that's how something like the MAC can be allowed in park. If that language wasn't in the code, then they would have to, change their zoning probably to public, quasi-public. But that's sort of the interaction on how zoning works. Either you change the code or you change your designation. So ideally, all the layers are going to work together. So let's say you're going to build a small housing subdivision, 10 lots, for example. Ideally, you would want it to be in the state urban district, community planned, single-family residential. It'd be zoned by the county as either, say R1, R2, or R3 residential, and then whether or not you're in the SMA or flood, that just depends on the area that it's in. And so if you had all of those line up, then you would have the proper land use designations to go forward with a project like that. However, that's not always the case. So looking back at that Queen Ka'ahumanu Maui Arts and Cultural Center area, you can see there's just a hodgepodge of uses at state urban, and then the community plan is park, but also the UHMC is, public, quasi-public, but the zoning for UHMC is actually R2, M1. So ideally, all of this would match, but, in a lot of cases, it doesn't. So when the layers aren't consistent, that's when there are certain type of permits that you can come in and seek, and that's what the current division process is. So examples of those types of permits are community plan amendments, state district boundary amendments, changes of zoning, conditional permits, and special use permit. And all of the permits above involve a public process. And also, just as a side note, when I first started working here, it wasn't something that happened quite often, but it's starting to happen a lot more, particularly in the last 10 years or so. And that's the department and applicants. We encourage them to meet with the public in advance prior to submitting these applications, because I think it's prudent to get buy-in from the community from the get-go, or at least get the pulse of the community and their concerns. I'll briefly touch up on environmental assessment and environmental impact statements. So environmental review is located in Hawaii Revised Statutes 343. And this is, it establishes a system of environmental review within the planning process, and its purpose is to encourage conservation of natural resources, enhance quality of life, assure public participation, and the accepting agency is the one with first approval authority, or it's the government agency when it's an agency action. So let's say, for example, the Department of Public Works is proposing something and it requires an EA. Approving authority would be the Department of Public Works. If it's an applicant proposing a project and the first approving authority would be the Maui Planning Commission, then the accepting authority for that would be the Maui Planning Commission. There's 9 triggers for environmental review. I'll just read every single one here. It's the use of state or county lands and funds. Oftentimes, that's the trigger that occurs, because when you build a project, oftentimes you're touching, state or county property, your roadways, et cetera. So that tends to be the trigger. Also, use of conservation district lands, use within the shoreline area, use within any designated historic site, use within the Waikiki area of Oahu, amendments to a county general plan, reclassification of conservation district lands, new or expanded helicopter facilities, and lastly, new wastewater facilities, waste-to-energy facilities, landfills, oil refineries, and power generating facilities. So as you can see, there's quite a few triggers, but there's also exemption classes. And all of this is coming from the Hawaii Environmental Policy Act. The 11 exemption classes are operations, repairs, or maintenance. So you can imagine, like, the Department of Public Works, if they wanted to redo the bathrooms here, that would trigger an EA, but should they really have to go through an EA to do something like that? Well, the answer is no, because there's an exemption, and that would be under exemption number 1. So other exemptions are replacement or reconstruction of existing structures, new small facilities and structures, minor alterations in the condition of land, basic data collection and research, minor structures accessory to existing facilities, interior alterations, demolition of structures except for historic structures, zoning variances except for shoreline setback variances, continuing administrative functions, and acquisition of land structures for affordable housing. So as you can see, there's a lot of triggers, but then there's also quite a few exemptions. And one more thing, I don't have a slide for this, but one question that I get sometimes is, what triggers an EA versus an EIS, so an environmental assessment versus an environmental impact statement. And that's also spelled out in the Hawaii Environmental Policy Act in Section 4.1. There's a section called significance criteria. So there's 13 criteria, and if any of these impacts occur for a project, then you have to do an environmental impact statement. I won't read them all, but I'll just read the first few. So if a project involves an irrevocable commitment to loss or destruction of any natural or cultural resource, that would be the trigger to go from an environmental assessment to a full-blown environmental impact statement. If a project curtails the range of beneficial uses of the environment, that would trigger an EIS. If it substantially affects the economic or social welfare of the community or state, you would need an EIS. Substantially affects public health, you would need an EIS. So as the impacts are greater, then you need an actual environmental impact statement. And so let me pivot over to special management area rules. So special management area, next slide. This is administered by the department and also the Maui Planning Commission. And the SMA rules are basically a management tool to assure that allowable developments are designed and carried out in a manner consistent with the coastal zone management objectives and policies and our SMA guidelines. So there's 3 types of SMA permits. There's also an exemption, but technically that's not a permit, and that's why that's not on here. But most SMA projects end up in exemptions because it's sort of similar to the environmental exemptions. It's like if you have an existing structure and you're just doing repairs or you're just doing maintenance, et cetera, or you're just doing a little addition, generally that's something that we exempt, and by exemption means you don't need a permit for it. But if it's not exempt, and exemptions are listed in our SMA rules, it's also listed in the Hawaii revised statutes. If a project is not exempt, then you either get a minor permit, a major permit, or an emergency permit. So with major permits, it's really a valuation. So if a project cannot be exempt and the valuation is over $500,000, then you need a major permit. That goes before the Maui Planning Commission, or of course, if you're on Lanai or Molokai, it goes before their commissions. That requires a public hearing. Owners within 500 feet are notified, and the department will recommend, and the commission will sometimes add on to it, conditions to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts. Projects that aren't exempt but are under $500,000, we can issue a minor permit administratively, and those don't require a public hearing. But we also put conditions to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts. And then lastly, there's emergency permits, and this is pretty rare, but sometimes with certain weather events or really large swells, there's situations where we need to issue an emergency permit, and we can only issue it if there's imminent and substantial harm to public welfare or to prevent substantial physical harm to persons or property. Oftentimes this is something where we get a phone call, maybe waves are hitting a structure near the ocean, it's falling apart, et cetera. With emergency permits, the director can give approval, but it still has to be reported to the Planning Commission. It expires in 180 days, meaning that even though you get an emergency permit, you still have to come in and get an actual permit. And I think this is the last slide. We also have shoreline setback rules, and ultimately the purpose of our shoreline setback rules are to move structures out of harm's way. So as you folks know, sea level rise, erosion, et cetera. We have to be smart about what we allow, how close to the ocean, because there's constant erosion happening. So that's what our rules try to account for, moving these things out of harm's way. Also planning for the obsolescence of structures in the setback. And then it also helps to ensure shoreline access, and then limit the types of structures and activities in the shoreline area, because like I said, we have certain areas, like say in West Maui, where the shoreline has been receding for years and years, and in large swells, some of these buildings are actually, the waves are actually impacting the buildings. So the shoreline setback rules attempt to sort of, one, mitigate that from happening in the future, and also, how do we deal with these structures that are existing but are in danger. So that's sort of an overview of the division and then the type of permits that we work on. And I can answer any questions that you folks want, although I think maybe, are we moving on to other?
We're going to save the questions until after. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to welcome all the landowners who are presenting today to come and take your seats. And we're going to start presenting in order from north to south, starting with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Aloha. My name is Julie Kachola. I'm a planner with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And thank you for having us today so we could present our plans for the Pulehunui area. And also we have lands in the very south part of your planning area. I have a short presentation. I think okay. Sorry. Excuse my back. It's kind of weird being in the middle here. So the Hawaiian Homelands was established by an act of Congress in 1921. And this was an act that Prince Kuhio had pushed through. He spent like 9 years going back and forth trying to get passed. And it basically set aside over 200,000 acres of land across the state of Hawaii to rehabilitate Native Hawaiians. And it was actually about a dying race. If you look at the chart on the bottom of the, so this is Native Hawaiian population at the time of Captain Cook, and then it just continually declined. Prince Kuhio lived right in this time frame, right here. So you can imagine his heavy load as a prince, last reigning prince, and watching the decimation of his people. And so he really felt that he needed to rehabilitate the people to actually save a dying race. That was the whole thing. So Native Hawaiians who are 50% or more Hawaiian blood can have residential, pastoral, or agricultural homestead leases for $1 per year for 99 years. That's what the homesteading program does. The Homestead Act, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act established a policy-making board as the Hawaiian Homes Commission, and that is 9 members appointed by the governor. And it also has that we can general lease our lands that are not used, that are not needed for homesteading, so that we can earn revenue, so that we can build homes and prairie lots. The Supreme Court recently determined that the legislature had an obligation to provide sufficient sums of funding for us, so that for the development of lots. So that's kind of changed everything there. Go ahead. What's important to understand about the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is that it was a condition of statehood. When the state of Hawaii, when the people were trying to lobby for statehood, they said, well, because this act already existed, that it required that the state of Hawaii adopt the act as its own and put it in the state constitution. So the whole act is actually part of the state constitution. I don't know how many people knew that. And specifically in Article 12, Section 2 of the state constitution, there was this acceptance of a compact that the state and its people, so not only just the state government, but all of us people in the state, have this compact with the United States to basically implement this act. It's the state and its people to further agree that, and declare that in the spirit of the act, we continue these projects and basically faithfully execute that. Go ahead. So our lands on Maui, and just to give you an idea on order of magnitude, there's 16% of our lands that are on this island. So 16%. And what I did was I kind of divided it up by the planning areas so that you can see, and I can't even see this, it's very good. For your planning area, there's 901 acres, or about 3% of our lands that are in this planning area. Go ahead. So on the south side, we have the Kalihi Kanahena area, 101 acres, and the Ahihi area. And it's basically bounding the NARS area. We're on both sides of it. And it's so interesting, you know, how the parcels are shaped on Maui County. Only in Maui County you have parcels that look like that. So that's on the south side, and it's basically slated for general agriculture. I should also mention that we have a whole planning system. Do I have that? I think I only have my lines. Our planning system is just like yours. It has a general plan and island plans and regional plans. And in our island plan, we look at every parcel of land and we determine what should that land be used for, and we zone it. And our zones are called land use designations, similar to your community plan designations. And the Attorney General has ruled that the Hawaiian Homes Commission has exclusive land use authority over Hawaiian homelands. So we can basically zone our lands. And so this is the opportunity tonight to share with you what our zoning is for the lands, because if you notice on page 79 of your draft, you have just a dotted line for Hawaiian homeland. So the Maui County is saying, we don't know what's going to happen here, right? And so we really wanted to come here tonight so that we could flesh out those parcels for you so that you could see what we had on our planning, our plans. So for this area in the south, it's general agriculture. It's basically too far away right now. It's not currently on deck for development. We're not going to be touching that lands for a long time. Go ahead. Now, this is the lands that we're looking at, right? It falls within your sub-area 2 of North Kihei, and we have lands on both sides of the Veterans Highway, 646 acres on the Mauka side, or I guess you could say, and then on the Makai side, which we call Pulehunui South, is 185 acres. And just to give you an orientation, so the top of this is where the Humane Society is, right? And then this is across the street from the park, Keliap, is that right? Okay. The pond, yeah. And then right in between that we have DLNR lands. Go ahead. So what happened was when we started looking at planning these lands, we looked around us and we found our sister agencies all around us. And so we actually met with them, DLNR, Department of Public Safety, DAGs. They're all in the process of planning their lands, and they're all planning to build a sewage treatment plant, and they're all looking at different ways that they're going to work the traffic. And we said, wait a minute, we really need to get this together, right? We really need to save money. We need to plan more efficiently. And so we huddled the agencies together, and we said, look, let's come up with a MOU that says that we're going to do this together so we can do some service here to the community and really work, do an efficient layout for the infrastructure, traffic, and whatnot, and plan this as one unit. And we knew that that would be a good thing to do from a funding point of view, because now they don't have to fund 5 wastewater treatment plants and 5 different planning efforts. So we went then as a coalition to our legislators, your legislators, actually Maui, and kind of broached our idea and said, we want to do this together because we think it's an efficient way to do it. And they said, very good, that's a good idea, and they funded us. And because we initiated it, they allocated the funding to us, so we managed, DHHL managed the process to develop a regional infrastructure master plan for this area that covered the state agencies. And then we also got funding to do the initial implementation of that. And because it was order of magnitude covering all of this area, we decided we should do an EIS instead of an EA. So we did do an EIS, and that was approved by the governor. Go ahead. So the Regional Infrastructure Master Plan, as I said, was an effort to, you know what, I can't really, hang on, I can't read this, my eyes are so bad. And this says what I already said, basically that we all required the same kind of things, and so we developed an agreement and the funding. Let's see and it also benefited us. So we were able to, out of that effort, be able to plan our 2 parcels out, because we had to do this regional plan, so we actually involved our beneficiaries in looking at our 2 parcels and kind of fleshed that out too. So that was a benefit for us. Go ahead. So for the Pulehunui North, it's just, you cannot deny the highway going by and all of that potential money. So that area is slated for commercial industrial, but we don't know how it will lay out on the land, because how we don't develop it. We basically put an RFP out. Is that Bill telling me I'm not at time? Oh, am I? Okay, so this is the north side. So it's also interesting. It's a smaller lens. So it's a little bit more difficult to develop. So we would be putting that RFP out and looking at proposals to come in. So we don't know exactly how it would lay out, but it would be a mix of commercial and industrial in that area. Go ahead. This is the area that we really didn't have an idea on what we wanted. When we first came out to our beneficiaries, they said, do not put us here. Do not put homesteads here, because this is a dust bowl, and you're putting us in the dust bowl, and don't insult us and put us in the dust bowl. So we thought, okay, well, we would keep this in general agriculture. When we came out the second time to do this planning effort, they saw the value of the location of these lands close to the airport, right on the main drag, and our lands in Maui are more upcountry. So now they're interested in some homesteading, but they really wanted to do agriculture homesteading. So what we have here is the base development is agricultural homesteading, and then you have around. Okay, so these would be the ag lands, and then you have this kind of in the, we call it the Pico area, the middle area, the support services. So you would have educational facilities, you would have the farmers market, you would have the commercial and culture and arts kind of places, uses. This is a general conceptual plan, so it's not really specific, but it's basically the idea of this is the Pico where the activity would happen, and on the outsides, and as you go Mauka, then you would have the less dense, the agricultural homesteads. Go ahead. I thought that it might be useful to do a crosswalk between our land use designations and your community plan designations. But now that I'm trying to explain it, maybe it wasn't a good idea, but you have it in your handout, so you can take a look at it later. But basically, I went from our planned land uses in the plan, and then our DHHL island land use designations, and then I crosswalked it with your guys' CP designation, so that, because I'm hoping that next time we don't have just a dotted line on our lands, that we actually have some kind of semblance that things are going to be happening there, and that we can crosswalk with you folks in terms of your designations. I don't have much to report on current status. We did finish the final EIS. There was $17.5 million that was appropriated to start the regional infrastructure, and the primary infrastructure item was the wastewater treatment plant. What happened there was we were working on it, and then county decided it was going to do a wastewater treatment plant. So we kind of stopped, and we are now basically working with Maui County to connect up to the new county's wastewater treatment plant. So that's kind of that's what's happening now on this project. And that's about it. I think, there's one thing I did also want to mention, because you guys wanted to focus on housing. And it's hard when we're trying to look at this area, how that translates into housing. So I did want to take a look at that. And basically, when we're looking here, we're looking at subsistence agricultural leases. With subsistence agricultural leases, they have an option to build a house. They must cultivate, and they don't have to build a house, but they could. And so based on that, we're estimating 80 to 100 lots, that would be constructed, so agricultural lots that could have homes built on it. It's an optional thing. I think with the housing situation the way it is, if somebody gets an ag lot, they would build a house, most likely. So, 80 to 100 if you need a number in that area. Thank you for having us. Thank you for giving us this time.
Thank you very much, and I hope you will stay around to answer questions and talk to us afterwards.
I will.
And next up, I guess we have Rory. Sorry? I'll turn lights on. Do you want the lights on or off? The question is, it's just kind of hard to read if the lights are on. It's really bright. And Rory, if you prefer to stand up, you can do that too, if it's easier. Okay.
Okay, thank you all for allowing us to be here. My name is Rory Frampton. You've seen me more than just a few times here. I'm a planning consultant for the Haleakala and Ko'onu'ulu Ranch, and I know all of you guys gave just brief background statements of where you're from. I just thought I'd do a quick one for myself since you've seen me so many times. I was raised here on Maui, went to Kula Elementary, went to St. Anthony High School, and then went off to college on the mainland. When we were growing up in Kula, I became really good friends with the Lu'uai Ohana, who had lands down in Makena. And we used to go up and down the Ulupalakua Road back when that road was in existence. I don't know how many people on the CPAC ever went up and down that road, but we used to do it a lot. Spent a lot of my early years down there. And actually, professionally, I've helped out a lot with the Lu'uai Ohana and the Kukahiko family in terms of helping preserve some of their lands. But when I went to UH, got my master's in planning, came back to Maui about a day after I got my degree, and worked at the county planning department. And by the way, when I was in California, Julianne Cachola and I were in Pomona College together, and I met her through the Hawaiian Club, and we've been good friends ever since. In 1990, I joined the planning department, and after a few years, one of the big projects we worked on was the update of the Kihei Community Plan back in 1992, and I was the facilitator for the CPAC. Back then, the planners did the facilitating, unlike like now, Rob is running the meetings, but I ran the meetings every 2 weeks in Kihei, and every other week I was down in Paia, but learned a lot about the concerns of the Kihei people back then, and been working in Kihei off and on various projects since then. Around 11 or 12 years ago, I was asked by the ranches to help them in during the Maui Island Plan, formation of the Maui Island Plan and the urban growth boundaries, and so I became their planner then, and I've been working with them off and on, and it's been an honor to work with those both ranches. Can we go to the next slide? Haleakala Ranch has been around since 1988, so that's about 135 years since their formation, and their goal is to be around for another 135 years. So as a long-range planner, it's kind of an ideal client to have. They're really long-term. They're, as you'll hear more of tonight, they're not about immediate things. They really want to do things that are good for the community, and they really have a long-range vision. And the same thing for Ko'onaulu Ranch. They work very closely together. They started when they heard about the Maui Island Plan, and they started doing some collaborative planning efforts between both ranches, trying to think about how could they best meet the community's needs. And that's really been their goal all along, and it still is today. And so they saw an opportunity to address future community needs while protecting the integrity and the legacy of both ranches. As a result of those efforts, an area was included in the Maui Island Plan. We call it Kihei Mauka. Other people suggest that maybe the better name is Kulakai Mauka. It's an area description, so we're open to whatever you guys want to call it as an area description. But about 583 acres were included. I'll go to that. Here's an island map showing the land holdings of both ranches, with Haleakala being in light green and Ko'onaulu being in blue. And the Haleakala lands, most of us know these lands going between Makawao or Pukalani and the Kula Lodge, all those beautiful pastures over there. And then the road to the crater goes up through Haleakala Ranch lands. And they own about 5,000 acres that are in the watershed above Waikamoi, and that's a 5,000 acre preserve that they've established with the Nature Conservancy. The ranch lands used to go into Haleakala Crater all the way down to Paliku, and they used to run their cattle down the switchback and into these areas and graze over there. But very early on in the early 1900s, I mean, everybody knew the natural beauty and characteristics of the crater, and there was talk to set up a national park. So they did do a land transfer of about 9,500 acres of these lands that were in the crater, and they got these lands down here in Kihei. It was an acre for acre swap, and that's how the park was formed and how they got their land holdings down in the hot country. For Ko'onaulu, they were acquired almost an entire ahupua'a running from the ocean up to the mountains. This little squiggly line going up through there, that's the road to Poli Poli Park. So both of the ranches have roads going up to Mauka resources that the public uses and enjoys. Next slide. In the Kihei area, this is a regional map with the Hawaiian homelands over here that we just talked about. The ranch's lands stretch from about Maui Meadows to the area above Ohukai and up to portions of Kula Highway, and this big block in the middle is DHHL. This Haleakala Ranch piece dog legs over and touches Pulehu Road. I like looking at this map just in terms of perspective. When we zoom in and we start looking at Kihei Mauka, it seems really huge. But if you look at it at a regional level, the 300 or so acres that comprise the Haleakala Ranch lands are about 1% of their holdings. The approximately 300 acres of Ka'onaulu lands, it's about 3.5% of their holdings. This area in between the communities, the ranches feel really important that these areas should be preserved and managed by livestock raising, and they provide a very important function for the community in terms of just preserving open space and separation between the communities. Go ahead. This is the straight out of the Maui County General Plan or the Maui Island Plan. It's the description of Kihei Mauka. That's the area, next to MRTP and A&B's project over there. So we're talking about this area here, and there's a planned growth area rationale and description of the project. Go ahead. On the next page here, what kind of describes some of the parameters and densities. Next slide. In terms of the natural land characteristics of these areas, it's gently sloping topography. It's a lot flatter up here in North Kihei than it is further south, with the exception of the gulches that run through these properties. The gulches are big and they're significant. They drain the mountain. I'll show you some pictures of that. In terms of agricultural lands, on a scale of A to E, the state of Hawaii's ranked them at E, the lowest quality of ag land. In terms of flora and fauna, there was a survey done in 2010, and back then it was almost all kiawe and buffalo grass. The botanical specialist consultant, he didn't find any rare or special plant habitats like you have in some of the areas in South Kihei with the willy trees and those forests. He didn't find any there. In terms of archaeology, there's relatively few archaeological sites. When I say relative, I'm just comparing that to other areas. There are archaeological sites, some of them significant, but it's a lot less than some of the concentrations in other areas of South Maui. In this area, there's temporary habitation sites and some rock art or petroglyphs. There's one potentially significant site that's believed to be ceremonial in nature. In other words, they believe it was a heiau, and it was dated to somewhere around between 1460 and 1600. So an old heiau that's fairly significant. We've always set that area aside, not just your standard buffer area, but a much larger area so that it could have its due respect, and possibly, there could be some interpretation, there could be a cultural center or whatever, but we've definitely set that side apart in the plans from day one. You can go to the next slide. This is, I took this over the weekend. It's the typical kiawe and buffalo grass landscape looking towards Ulupalakua. It's really flat area in this proximity. We can go next slide. And that's the looking makai. And it's nice. The winter rains have really helped, and this buffalo grass got established pretty quickly after the winter rains. Next slide. This is Kalani Hokoi Gulch, and it's pretty awe-inspiring to me just to look at the depth of this gulch and the width of it. A lot of time, a lot of water created this gouge through the basalt layers. A pretty significant feature in the landscape. This is right below there, looking in the bed itself, and you can look at, and you can just see how much water flows down through that area. So it's, again, awe-inspiring to me how it carved its way through this rock. And it's also dumbfounding to think that South Kihei Road was built, I don't know when it was built, but originally it had like 4 little box culverts under it to pass through this huge amount of water that comes down the mountain. Next slide. That's just this is some of the basalt layers that the river or the gulch, the waters have carved through, and the polishing of the boulders. For me personally, I just kind of find it, again, awe-inspiring. Next page. So the rationale for the growth in this area is that it's adjacent to existing and planned facilities, Kalani Hako'i High School, Maui Research and Technology Park, Kihei Charter School, and other planned and future light industrial uses. It's in North Kihei, which means there would be relatively lower impacts on Pi'ilani Highway, not no impacts, but meaning less than other areas further south. It's considered a logical area for growth. It was considered a logical area for growth during the Maui Island Plan process, and was supported at all levels, including the Focus Maui Nui grassroots planning effort, the General Plan Advisory Committee, the Planning Commission, various county administrations, and the Maui County Council. And really, what most people have seen here is an opportunity for comprehensive long-term planning. The type of planning that didn't really happen in Kihei because of the fragmented ownership. Kihei was subdivided into 20-acre homestead lots a long time ago. It had all separate owners, and there wasn't really an opportunity for the landowners to work together, at least they weren't forced to. When I was the facilitator for the CPAC back in 1992, that was one of the biggest frustrations. Was in Kihei, they didn't see comprehensive planning going on. They did see it happening at the master plan resorts. They saw it happening in Wailea. They saw it happening at Kapalua, in Kaanapali, and there was actually a vote taken, and it approved by a slim margin. I think it was a 7-6 margin vote to include all the area from Maui Meadows to Ohukai as one project district, because they wanted one landowner to do a master plan for the whole thing so that their future growth could be coordinated like they saw happening in other of the master plans. Now, that didn't make its way into the final version of the plan. It got whittled down by the administration and the council, and I think the rationale back then was there was still a lot of area in Kihei proper that could still be developed. And there were a lot of vacant lands back in 1992. Those lands, most of them have been developed. The ones that haven't are pretty problematical. So I think it is time that we start looking Mauka and do some master planning. This is not going to happen quickly. It's going to be a very long-range process. Can we go to the next slide? This is the map of the area showing the adjacent uses with Maui Research and Technology Park to the south, the Kihei High School, what was formerly called the Pi'ilani Promenade subdivision, the Ohukai and Kawahini neighborhoods, and then A&B's Kamalani project. Next slide. The vision, this is a straight quote out of the Maui Island Plan, is that it's a network of compact, walkable neighborhoods with neighborhood commercial nodes concentrated in the village centers of Kihei Mauka. And the real major goal is to provide a range of housing types to meet resident needs. And when the chair asked us to talk about, what the purpose of the project is and how does it relate to residential housing, that's the major goal of this project, is to provide housing for Maui residents. It's not an area that's a resort type, high-end luxury type housing area. Next slide. And these urban planning and design principles, really, this page came a lot from the KCA. They want to see it primarily residential, neighborhood serving commercial with no big box or regional centers, locations for schools and public facilities and parks and green links between neighborhoods and roundabouts at intersections instead of traffic signals. And my understanding is KCA is recommending that this whole area be designated with some strong caveats, which we will have discussions about later. Next page. And these principles are in the Maui Island Plan. I won't go through them all. I do want to talk about drainage, low impact drainage design, both in terms of quantity and quality. Anything that gets developed up here can't contribute or can't make the drainage problem worse. It's going to have to reduce water coming off the property in terms of quantity, and the quality of the water will have to be better than what's coming off it now. The gulches, of course, will be preserved as open space and greenway systems. And very importantly, this build-out is going to occur in phases, concurrent with infrastructure, over a long period of time. This is a very conceptual master plan, but it kind of gives the idea of these, first the connection from Maui Research and Technology Park through Ninau Street and providing north-south mobility. roundabouts at the intersections, clusters of some commercial surrounded by housing. I think after discussions with KCA, some of the commercial uses might be toned down a little bit more with more emphasis on housing. Again, it's very conceptual and early in the process. There's a green area here where the Heiau site is. It's hard to see on this map, but we've set that aside for sure on any, as set aside on any master plan for the area. Next slide. This is what it would look like in the community plan, with the exception that they would all the gulches would be identified with green strips running through the project, but the new nomenclature or types of districts that they have for the community plan, the small town center fits this project most directly, so that's what we would be, the designation would be. Next slide. Just wanted to talk about regional drainage issues real quickly. I know that's a huge concern here in South Maui. Both ranches have been participating with other stakeholders to come up with regional solutions, and a lot of this activity has been happening recently with NRCS, the County of Maui, and the council member Tom Cook, and they've actually had some very productive meetings about actually getting going on some drainage projects. And I don't want to make any promises, but the discussions have been very, very positive. They've also worked with Ulupalakua Ranch to form the Malama Haleakala Foundation. I think I've mentioned that to this group a couple times. The purpose of that group is to be able to serve as a conduit for funding from federal sources to do some major large-scale watershed and drainage improvements to mitigate the impacts to downstream properties and the ocean. Hopefully the Malama Haleakala Foundation will also be a conduit for community engagement so that the public can hear more about what's going on and be part of the solution. There's a lot of efforts that the ranches have done towards deer control, from hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of deer fencing to control the migration of the populations to various methods of culling and reducing the population itself. Other pilot projects that they've undertaken involve all R1 reuse and native revegetation of gulch corridors. There's been some really cool work along Keokea Gulch with the native planting along the edge of the gulch, using R1 water, fencing it out so the deer can't get there, and then having that vegetative area serve as like a filtration for the waters, for the sheet flow before going into the gulches. Next slide. We've talked about transportation and this idea of a Mauka north-south collector versus a Mauka bypass. I think the consensus is becoming that the Mauka north-south collector is much more feasible and realistic than a Mauka bypass, and that's what we're planning for. And we've suggest that initiating the route study for a connection to Veterans Highway happens as soon as possible. The map that was shown by Hawaiian Homelands shows a roadway that could connect right to this north area that they're planning on, and there's not that far between areas where we could possibly make that connection point to Veterans Highway. So I look forward to discussing this with my old college classmate. And there was a concern that the funding for the route study may jeopardize funding for the north-south collector road. I don't think that'll happen because they're really at different phases of the project development. The north-south collector road is looking for construction money. That's a different pot of money, in my understanding, than just a route study and initial planning efforts. So in no way should it jeopardize anything going on with the north-south collector road. That's a #1 priority, but I think it can be done concurrently where we just start the initial planning efforts for this Mauka road. It's only going to take a fraction of the money that you need for construction of the lower road. Next slide. That's this is the state of Hawaii's sub-area transportation plan, and it shows a concept of a Mauka collector. This one has it connecting to the intersection with North Kihei Road. Others have suggested that it go to the highway here, and that connection that Julie showed on her map was right about here. So we're really close to doing that, and I think that might be a great way to make the connection and it makes sense for them to do it too, to help with regional traffic problems and alternative ways into and out of Kihei. Next slide. Again, repeating myself, this is a really long-term planning horizon. I like to think of the examples of Maui Lani and Kehalani. Those projects began planning efforts in the early 70s. Construction didn't start until the 90s, and they're still in the build-out mode. But because they had this long-range vision and scale, they were assured sites for schools, for parks, for roadways. I mean, the agencies planned for it, and that's what they got. And it didn't happen overnight. It happened in phases. But if you look at it, for the most part, you know, their roads are pretty good, and they've got a full range of assets for their community. So that's what I like to kind of think about when we're talking about the time frame and how this master plan process could work. Next slide. Next steps. It's important to note that the ranches are not developers, and they won't be the developers of the various projects within Kihei Mauka. However, the intent is to really set the stage for positive future growth for the residents of South Maui through these collaborative planning efforts. And the next steps in the entitlement process will be initiated by others, but they'll be following the vision and the parameters that have been established in the Maui Island Plan and the community plan, and that's where the ranches are hoping to play a major, significant role in defining something, again, that's positive for the community of South Maui over the long term. So future steps would be an environmental impact statement, a state land use district boundary amendment, and a change in zoning, and that's where a lot of the details and the infrastructure requirements will be hammered out and attached as conditions to the project to make sure that all the things that I'm talking about are actually done and completed. That's the end. I hope I probably went over my 15 minutes. I'm sorry if I did, but that concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder if we should take a 5-minute break now, just because we have I think let's see, we have three more presentations. So 5-minute break. Okay. Okay, resuming at 6:39 p.m. And next up is LIPOA, or MRTP as they used to be called.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Churchill, and I'm here with Leilani Pomano. We're with Pacific Rim Land. Wanted to thank all of you for having us tonight and letting us give you an update on the Maui Research and Tech Park. And also wanted to thank all of you for the time you put in on the CPAC. I know it's a lot of time coming week in, week out for many months, so I appreciate what you're doing to help make this South Maui plan come together. Next slide. So who are we? Pacific Rim Land is a real estate company founded in 1988, and we are based up in the Tech Park. We're locally owned, and at the start of 2020, we took full ownership of the undeveloped lands up in the Tech Park. And that's important because since that time, we've been advancing the design and permitting up there. Okay, so here's a map showing the MRTP lands in the community plan, which is in the Maui sub-area of the community plan. You can see the highlighted area there, the black outline with the arrow. I think most of you are probably pretty familiar with the area. Next slide is a zoom in of the aerial showing you the lands. It's approximately 400 acres, so you can see the developed area that's existing now, and then all the undeveloped lands in the area. Some background on the Tech Park. You know, it's a long-planned growth area for South Maui. It's in the growth area of the Maui Island Plan. The zoning was updated in 2016, which included a full EIS, has state land use, urban, has its own zoning, which is Maui County Code 19.38, just specific just to these lands. And it's based on a form-based code, the first on Maui. Our zoning, as I just mentioned, is its own zoning code. And the form-based code is one which dictates more specific land use requirements than typical zoning. For our uses, we have specific setbacks, specific FAR standards, minimum and standard, which sort of dictates how the buildings lay out on each lot that's developed. The traditional neighborhood design was core to the design, which as part of that design, similar to what Rory said, takes into account the, actually I got a slide, the next slide I'll talk into that. The traditional neighborhood design gives a walkable main street with commercial areas lining sidewalks and parking in the back. We'll not only have areas to shop, but we'll also have areas to work, areas to live, areas to dine. We will have parks, green area, and a village square. The plan is pedestrian oriented with significant sidewalks, as you see up there now. Most of our roads will have sidewalks on both sides that will be 5, 6 feet or greater. We'll have significant trail system. Our design takes into account the bus system. We have schools up there. We have schools within walking distance. We'll have civic buildings and community spaces to gather. Now I'll turn over to Leilani, who will provide an update of the current activity in the park.
Thank you. Good evening. So we've been actively bringing the vision of Maui Research Technology Park to fruition, and this slide shows the various projects that we plan on breaking ground in the near term. So we have 3 subdivisions, and the first subdivision is the mixed-use subdivision, which is outlined here. As the name implies, we're going to have a mix of uses, which includes 377 multifamily residential units. And these units will be mixed income, including affordable units, and offer rental multifamily housing. The mixed-use subdivisions will also include a village green, you see there, at its core, which is a focus of the park. Surrounding the village green, there'll be neighborhoods serving commercial uses, such as a coffee shop and small-scale restaurants. Next to the village green, there are civic uses, such as hard courts, playgrounds. The second subdivision is the Makai subdivision. The Makai residential subdivision, which will be 132 single-family and multifamily units, predominantly single-family units, and the park's form-based code requires neighborhood-scaled small lots with houses facing the street and access off of a secondary road. And as you can see, there's also a central green. It's central green here, a green space for the residents. There will also be pedestrian paths throughout the park, and especially in the Makai subdivision, connecting the houses to various tot lots scattered throughout the neighborhood. Again, the form-based code allows for some flexibility of uses here, and there will be small neighborhood-serving commercial spaces. Our third subdivision is the commercial subdivision, which will be 3 large lots on the south end of the park. And these lots are focused on expanding technology and our innovation companies that's currently existing in the park. In regards to regional infrastructure, the backbone infrastructure is located nearby the park, which makes it easy to connect to. For roads, Lapoa intersection here will be improved to include additional turning lanes to Pi'ilani Highway and into Lapoa Parkway. Lapoa Parkway will be fully constructed to have 2 lanes going Mauka and 2 lanes going Makai. There'll be a second access to Pi'ilani off of Ho'okena, which Ho'okena Street is here, through our Makai residential subdivision, and this is the second access. It'll be a right turn in and a right turn out, and not be signalized. And in the long term, as Rory indicated, the now street will be the north-south Mauka Collector Road. The Kihei wastewater treatment plant is located just nearby, and the park currently has R1 water available. The R1 water infrastructure will be distributed throughout the park to reduce the demand for potable water. For water, a 1 million gallon water tank will be constructed to help with regional water redundancy for the county water system. The park will have a mix of county water and private water. For drainage, there's a comprehensive drainage system to retain and desilt runoff. And we have large series of basins running Mauka to Makai to help with that, capturing this runoff. The park is designed, as Ryan was saying, to be walkable and bikeable with green space and trails throughout the park. Next slide, please. We plan on starting construction of the Lapoa Parkway, widening and the commercial subdivision this fall. The construction of the mixed-use and Makai residential subdivisions to start in 2024, along with the Pi'ilani intersection improvements. And we anticipate in 2026 families moving into homes. This shows the current recommended community plan designations of small town center, transit-oriented corridor, park, and open space. Next slide. We are requesting the park to be within the special purpose district. As mentioned earlier, the park is a form-based code zoning code that has a level of detail that most zoning designations do not. This is a relatively new zoning code, as Ryan was saying, starting in 2016. And we recommend that the community plan designations, we are nervous that the recommended community plan designations would be incompatible with our zoning designations. And the special purpose district allows the uses in the zoning designations to prevail. So in summary, Pacific Rimland is a local developer located in the place that we are actually developing, and this provides a heightened level of ownership and sense of responsibility. We have our zoning set, and construction is anticipated to begin this fall. Following the uses set by zoning, the park is a well-designed community where people can live, work, and play. And housing is planned to be move-in ready in 2026. The infrastructure has been designed with best practices, and the park includes community facilities like parks and trails. So this concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions when the time is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's see, next up we have LEDCOR.
Yeah. Okay, we all set? Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Chair, members of the committee, David Good here on behalf of LEDCOR Maui and our Wailea program of properties. Can you turn to the next slide, please? First, let's start with some background on Wailea zoning entitlements, which coincidentally
were granted by the Maui County Council 50 years ago today, April 19th, 1973. The zoning approval included hotel and commercial zoning, as well as residential and apartment zoning. Many residential condos that were built prior to 1989 allow short-term rentals, but none of built since that time have allowed short-term rentals unless they're hotel zoned. A number of single-family subdivisions have been built as well. Overall, the resort area is about 90% complete. The zoning approval allowed approximately 6,700 residential and apartment units, but about 2,400 have been built to date. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, hang on. Also granted in 1973 with the zoning approval was a planned development, a specific overlay zoning which allows zoning uses to be moved within the original overall area by approval of the Maui Planning Commission. At least 6 to 8 transfers have been done over the last 50 years. Okay, next slide, please. So fast forward to today, Ledcor Maui has acquired, or has leased to acquire from A and B, the remaining developable parcels in Wailea, which are outlined in yellow on this slide, and are primarily in the Malka portion of Wailea. One parcel, SF8, is on the left side here. You can see that, that's also the north end of that map. Is not in Wailea Resort proper, and is actually in your South Maui Sub-Area 3. The 7 other parcels are in Wailea Sub-Area 4 of your plan. This collection of remaining infill sites with already built infrastructure, the roads, water sewer system, water storage tanks, that will service our planned density. Having said that, the development program will need to mitigate their incremental effects, which will be better understood as a whole through the EIS process. So as such, Ledcor Maui has begun preparing an EIS for all the parcels and related work. An EIS preparation notice was published in December of 2022. A public meeting was held, Daniel was there, among others, and noted that approximately 925 to 975 residential units will be developed over a roughly 20-year time frame. The draft EIS is being prepared based on the information provided through the EISPN responses and the EIS rules, and is expected to be published by the end of this year. Accordingly, we have no conceptual plans to present at this time, but we can speak generally to our goals and the draft map that's under consideration by you folks. Next slide, please. So this is from your plan. The draft map provided by the Planning Department shows 5 of our parcels in the residential designation, that's in yellow. We have 1 in hotel resort in that dark brown, and 2 in the small town center, the pink color. We concur with the draft map designations as they will allow residential uses, and it's consistent with the parcel zoning. Existing zoning uses include residential R2, apartment A1 and A2, and business B2. We do, however, have some issues with the drainage way, open space designations that are simply inaccurate. Next slide, please. So the open space definition is generally fine. I think it outlines the goals nicely, but it's mapped in such a way that it implies it's already been determined where these sensitive lands are. But in a lot of cases, that work to determine sensitivity and exact location has not been done. In our experience, when working with a proposed project's conformance to the community plan, the lines on the map do matter. And the planning department staff has a difficult time matching up the zoning uses and the community plan maps. And I think Danny touched on that earlier, that have been in the past, the community plan maps have been determined or interpreted to be exact. So we'll show an example here in the next slide. We suggest that you add language to this definition that the map's open space designations are conceptual in location. Add a sentence at the end of the definition that, quote, the open space areas shown are conceptual only with size, location, and purpose to be determined through an entitlement process, such as an SMA or change in zoning. Next slide, please. So here's an example. This parcel that we control in Wailea is bounded by Okolani Drive. This is Pi'ilani up here. Can't see it very well from this lighting. That's Pi'ilani, this is Okolani Drive, and this is the parcel. And you can see there's a drainage way shown that bisects the parcel. There's another drainage way to the north and one to the south. In reality, however, Pi'ilani Highway was cut through the terrain where this drainage way perhaps had once connected over to Maui Meadows. There's now no water that can jump this cut. And so there's no water that flows in that drainage way. There is a drainage way, the one to the south, where you can see the photograph on the right. That's from the December 2021 storm. That was a pretty big storm. Some say it was close to a 100-year storm in that area. And water did flow in that drainage way, which we expect, and I think you folks have already determined and called that one of the major drainage ways, Wailea Drainage Way, and we acknowledge that. The drainage way to the north also had some flows go across the golf course, not quite as strong. But nothing came on the golf course from the phantom drainage way. So that phantom drainage way, as well as the three other drainage ways, I think they're drainage ways, they look like little scratches that are shown up on this map, all need to be removed ultimately. So this is not the only error on our properties, but it's the one I'm going to highlight today as an example. Imagine how many times these kind of inaccuracies affect the other parcels. That's why we believe it's important that the definition of open space be kept at a high level and not at a precise level where we have imprecise information. Okay, next slide, please. Workforce housing. Ledcor Maui will comply with Maui County Code 2.96, the Workforce Housing Ordinance. We will look to meet the requirements by supporting a variety of solutions, looking to build part of our legal requirements through workforce housing, say on SF8 and other Wailea properties, as well as looking to support part of our legal requirements through credits for housing, where it is more beneficial to build outside of our program sub-area, which is very expensive due to high land values and building requirements. Next slide, please. So again, we're looking to introduce workforce housing as part of our development program. We do support adding housing closer to workplaces in Wailea, and we support the use of credits to jumpstart other projects island-wide. That certainly will be more cost-effective to build and operate than in Wailea. We're not anticipating any government subsidies. And finally, workforce housing is a countywide issue and needs a countywide approach. Next slide, please. So developing workforce housing requires consistent government policies. Some of the policies recommended by the CPAC, we believe, will make workforce housing and housing in general more difficult to implement. For instance, one of our parcels is in South Maui, sub-area 3. That's the one I pointed out earlier called SF8. It's located kind of behind the fire station. The draft plan has a policy that restricts building workforce housing to the sub-areas where the market housing is being offered. Another policy requires workforce housing to be close to schools and other facilities. And we are 4 to 5 miles away from the new high school and Lopilani Intermediate. Is that close? Probably not walkable, probably not bikeable. Wailea also has higher internal standards through the Wailea Community Association, the WCA, including the paying of fees and higher upkeep and architectural standards, all of which will apply to workforce housing and make it harder to build and to own. The parcel in sub-area 3 does not have WCA requirements. But again, it couldn't be used per the policy with our Wailea properties. Excuse me. Finally, another policy requiring workforce housing within high-end and luxury projects and no use of credits is really unrealistic and inconsistent with the law and not fair to other communities who may be on the receiving end of funding. So finally, while we have a long ways to go with workforce housing in general, South Maui has actually done quite well since 2016. You may recall the workforce housing ordinance was amended in 2015. But since 2016, there's been more workforce housing permitted and built in South Maui than market housing. And that's from the Maui County's own building permit statistics. So we feel we really don't want to throw cold water on recent successes by making policies that actually make it harder to build. Next slide, please. So in summary, the designations that are proposed are appropriate. We're fine with that. The open space definition. In summary, the designations proposed are appropriate. The open space definition needs to be made more general and the mapping cleaned up. Policies consistent with the law is very important. We're going to comply with Maui County Code 2.96, and we are looking to build some of our required workforce housing within our program boundaries and to use credits to support other projects. Next slide, please. Again, mahalo for your time, your energy, your devotion to this process, and we look forward to any questions the committee has. To follow the progress of our EIS, you can always visit ledcoresouthmaui.com. Mahalo.
Thank you. And our last presenters today would be Wailea Gulf.
Hello. Good evening, aloha, and thank you for having us. My name is Christian Chan. I'm a principal with Wailea Golf. This is my colleague Barry Hele. He's with our senior management team. Sorry. We'll wait for the presentation. Just want to start, well, first of all, also thank you to the committee members for those of you who we have met. Thank you for your time, and hello again. For those of you whom we have not met, we look forward to the opportunity in the near future. So Wailea Golf has been owned and operated by my family, the Chan family, for just over 20 years now. Our family enterprise was founded by my father, Caleb Chan, in 1979, and in the over 4 decades since then, we've focused on being mindful community builders through our residential communities, our recreational properties, as well as our nonprofit and philanthropic work. As a family and a company, we're invested in a multi-generational philosophy of doing good for our communities while doing well in business. And my hope is that this will become evident as we engage in further discussions here tonight and beyond. So just wanted to give an overview of what properties we own here in South Maui. We do own 3 golf courses, the Gold, the Emerald, and the Blue courses, comprising 54 holes. Total land area of just under 550 acres, and our largest contiguous parcel in the right-hand side of the screen here is about 375 acres. All of our property is makai of the Pi'ilani Highway line. All of it is outside of the flood hazard areas, and all of it is within the urban growth boundary. I think it's important to point out that, these properties have served us very well for the last 20 years. We employ over 150 people, and it's a profitable business. So I guess the next slide. Looks like it's missing the top, but maybe it's just not visible on the screen, sorry. It's supposed to say at the top, why consider any changes in land use, given that these properties currently serve us well? Well, really, we think it's important to explore the opportunity to create value for the community while creating value for our company and help tangibly realize the goals of the South Maui Community Plan. I think it's important to talk about that word consider, just because there have been no decisions or conclusions made that we will submit anything to the plan, any proposed map or change in our land uses. But we do think it's important as a major landowner to think about how can we help realize the goals, the policies, the actions that you all as a committee have put together. And we would be proud to be able to help make that change for our community if possible and if feasible. Next slide. So what do we mean when we talk about value? Well, value is created in our land, and land in general, with changes towards higher and better uses, which are achieved through certain approvals that we can call entitlement value. So our property has a current as-is value. It'll appreciate over time as real estate does. But if we were to submit something and move through the approvals process, there's this additional layer of entitlement value that could be in the form of land, it could be in the form of financing or funding. And this value that we could collectively create in the land could then be shared with the community in a variety of ways. Next slide. I don't need to dwell on this too long because you all know these are the 5 goals of the South Maui Community Plan. And we have check marks next to them because we believe that we can help accomplish these goals in various ways. Next slide. And to that point, we've been asking ourselves a variety of questions. Again, part of the slide is missing, my apologies. But for each of the 5 goals, we're asking ourselves critical questions like, how can we help reduce congestion, increase using alternate modes of transportation? How can we help improve mobility and connectivity? How can we help alleviate the shortage of workforce housing in South Maui? How can we add to the parks and open space as well as botanical assets of the island? How can we help sustain and improve the function of our community? How can we improve civic and community infrastructure? And how can we help mitigate risk and further emergency preparedness? Next slide. Also, as it relates to Mauka and Makai watershed management, how can we improve the ecology of South Maui and enhance the vitality of the watershed Moku and Aina? How can we respond to the risks and needs of responsible watershed management? When it comes to responsible stewardship of Wahi Kupuna and historic properties, how can our properties help ensure both historical as well as living culture in South Maui thrives? How can we help promote cultural practices and protect cultural assets? And how can we plan and design a community in a way that celebrates Wahi Kupuna? So those are the questions that we're asking ourselves, and then we'll step through each goal. And these are some ideas that we've generated internally that we think may be achievable within or throughout our property. So for the first goal of a complete, balanced, and connected transportation network, we would love to investigate the development of a new greenway or multi-use trail system around and through our property in Wailea. This example here is the North Shore Greenway, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. We could also look at dedicating land around our property to the county for a transit or mobility hub. We could potentially contribute capital to help realize the widening of the Pi'ilani Highway. And of course, we would look to incorporate complete streets and transit-oriented design principles in the design and development of any new project or areas that we would put on the table. Next slide. When it comes to safe, healthy, and livable communities for all, we'd be interested in looking at dedicating land specifically for workforce housing or potentially Hawaiian homelands. We could develop substantial workforce housing as a part of the community land use program, potentially in excess of the required amount. And I'll just distinguish between the two because, if we were to look at any development or creation of housing, there's of course the requirement to build, but then separately we might also look at dedication of land to the county or other entities for their own development of workforce housing or affordable housing. We're particularly interested in the idea of endowing a community land trust that would be able to ensure the perpetuity of these workforce housing or other land uses. They would own, operate, and benefit from that land in the long term. And then I already just discussed the last point, developing a new greenway and multi-use trail system, which also contributes to this goal. Next slide. When it comes to safe, healthy, livable communities for all, which is the same goal, we could continue to dedicate land to the county or potentially a community association or other entity for the development and maintenance of a diverse network of parks. They could be neighborhood parks, they could be larger parks. We would seek to integrate environmental design and low-impact development principles in anything new that we were to propose. And we would also look to emphasize the use of native flora and shade trees in all of our landscape design. When it comes to ready and resilient systems, we're interested in exploring the development of a desalination plant that could service not only our potable water needs, but also potentially beyond. One idea that we are quite interested in is contributing to and soliciting other local partners from Wailea to generate enough capital to realize the extension of the R1 water system into the heart of Wailea, take a lot of the irrigation needs off potable water supply. We would also be interested in discussing dedicating land to the county for the development of civic infrastructure, fire stations, resiliency hubs, and importantly, to help with any managed relocation or coastal retreat. Again, we're outside of those flood hazard zones. We would also look to collaborate with the county to identify ways to support emergency preparedness within our property, things like emergency access and evacuation. Mauka to Makai watershed management. I'm very interested in looking at the development of a stormwater park. I've had the pleasure of visiting stormwater parks, and I'm very impressed not only with the ability to create ecological benefits like flood mitigation and water quality improvements and groundwater recharge, but also they're just fantastic recreational amenities for the community. We would look to retain, restore, and enhance any wetlands features that are on our property or potentially were on our property in order to positively contribute to the watershed management. And we would also incorporate nature-based solutions, low-impact development, and green infrastructure in the design of any new development projects or areas. Lastly, the fifth goal of responsible stewardship of Wahikapuna and historic properties. This is something that's very personal to me. I've been involved with arts and culture for the last 12 years. I founded an arts and culture nonprofit where I'm from in Vancouver, BC, that's focused on promoting emerging artists of color. And I've also been on the boards of a number of cultural nonprofits and charities. So I would love to see the development of a cultural center in South Maui focused on Native Hawaiian arts and culture, potentially with spaces and programming related to education, exhibition, performance, and maybe research. Also interested in seeking the establishment of a cultural park that preserves, restores, and showcases Wahikapuna in and around the new development project areas. I also love the idea that's been discussed around the committee table about more wayfinding and didactic signage and other features that might be incorporated around the project area or any new greenway or trail system that can also, again, celebrate cultural history as well as living culture. One last idea I'll throw out there, but I won't get too deep into. There's been a lot of discussion around the committee table about, well, how are these, this plethora of things that we want funded and executed? How will that be managed? How will that be financed? And just love to plant the seed of, could we look at establishing an improvement district in South Maui? This is something that if we were to move forward with any proposed land use changes or development or new uses for our land, we could potentially contribute into along with other members of the private sector. This would be a non-governmental, nonprofit organization focused on projects and programs that specifically further the policies, actions, and goals of the South Maui Community Plan. It would be, again, funded by the South Maui private sector, specifically formed per South Maui needs, and governed and managed by the South Maui community. Maybe we can talk about that at some other point in time. So, tentative next steps. I think this is the point where we can explain why we're not yet submitting a growth map with land use designations. Frankly, we just aren't ready to, and we're not sure that we are going to. Through this process, through further engagement and discussion with the community, I think we will know and the community will know if it's right to propose anything. We presented some ideas here today. We would love to see if those ideas can come to fruition and if they're realistic and feasible. We would want it to be a joint and collaborative process with this committee, with the community, to decide whether it makes sense to submit a map. So this is the timeline that we have in mind, starting on the left-hand side with some steps that have already been accomplished. We've been in attendance at virtually all of the CPAC meetings, just listening and learning, first and foremost. And then just as of the last couple weeks, as the committee's near finalization of the policies, actions, and goals, we've had an opportunity to further assess what those recommended goals, policies, and actions are. And tonight, I think it was included in the agenda materials, we'd like to propose a policy, which I can maybe read later on if that's appropriate, to support the potential postponed submission of a growth map by our company. Moving forward, we'd look to engage and discuss any land use program with the CPAC, with the community, and with the county. And then from there, we would evaluate whether it makes sense to submit a refined land use program and growth map, and then the steps for approval thereafter. I think I'd just like to end with a few points of clarification here. The concepts that I discussed in this presentation are really a menu of items that we currently see as potentially viable actions on our property. They're not meant to be conclusive or exclusive. They're really just a jump-off point for ongoing discussions with the community. It's not meant to imply that all things are necessarily possible. They might be. But what and how many of these menu items are feasible will depend on the scale and type of land use approvals that we might propose and gain approval for. I want to make it clear that golf will always remain a core element of our property. And with any land use changes, our intention would be to enhance the golf and recreational experience and definitely not eliminate it. That's all I have. Barry, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that covered it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to point out that we'd actually invited 6 landowners, but the sixth one, the Weinberg property, was not able to attend and present. However, their presentation is in the package that you have on your desk. So we have 6 altogether. So at this point, I'm going to open up to public testimony, and you can address either or both Danny's presentation from the planning department and any of the landowners that are presented today. So first, testifier, please state your name and come to the when you come to the microphone.
Hi, everyone. Doug Ballard, South Maui resident and also with Maui Tomorrow. I want to talk about a couple things. First, your land use designations. When you look at the land use designations, these were developed, as I understand it, for West Maui, and they may be fine for West Maui, but it's within your power, within your charge, if you wish it to be, to look at the components of those land use designations and see if they're appropriate for South Maui. We would encourage you to do that. And in that process, we would encourage you to look at what might be possible by those designations, not necessarily what some development plan presented might show or wish to do within that classification. You have to look at all those things that might be possible in the future when you're looking at those classifications. And so that obviously takes time and great thought, and we'd encourage you to do that. Relative to the expansion of the South Maui, or of the small town center that was discussed, that more than doubles the size, or at least appears to double the size of the existing small town center that's there now. We would caution, and the things that the small town center itself is a pretty wide open classification. So again, if the development plans don't plan out, you have to look at what else might come down the pike, and would that be appropriate for this location. And this location's a pretty sensitive location. You've got major drainage ways that are going through that. I know Shar Schulenberg mentioned in her piece that I think you may have, that there might be opportunities to really solve drainage problems, not just not compound them, but to solve drainage problems. And I think you need to be looking at things like that as well. And a small town center is and can be a fairly intensive land use designation. And is that appropriate for this sensitive piece of property? So I wanted to leave you with that. And we all know, county drainage standards, and saying that we'll meet county drainage standards. Well, county drainage standards are woefully behind right now, from all I've heard anyway. And we know that storms are getting stronger and stronger and happening with greater frequency. And just what might not be considered a heavy rain, but a rain we had today is causing, problems. And so we would encourage you to really take a hard look at this particular property in terms of the potential for less intensive uses. Well, I'll leave it at that. The other thing we'd encourage you to do, though, and perhaps the planning department can help with this, is you may want to take a look at what's already in the pipeline in terms of growth. If you look at the Research and Tech Park, Wailea 670, and the McKenna Resort project, you're looking at 3,400 units right there. And so it may be worth your while to look at what is already in the pipeline as you make your other deliberations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for the testifier? Daniel?
Thank you, Doug, for being here tonight. And I wanted to ask you about your comment on the land use designations in the current draft plan, which, of course, are very different from the ones in the current community plan. So you were saying that we should look very closely at this to make sure that the designations are a good fit for our community plan area. And what with each designation, there is, things that could happen, land use things. Do you have an example?
No, I can't think of one at the moment, except that I know that these designations were developed for a different part of Maui. And I guess the question is, and you may come to the conclusion that they're perfectly fine for here, but I'm saying that it is worth looking at for this committee to look at and see if, in fact, what these designations are possibly allowing, is that what you really want?
Thank you, Doug.
Any other clarifying questions? Thank you. Next testifier.
Aloha, Kelly King, 40-plus year resident of Kihei, among other things. And I hope you give us a little bit leeway today because we sat through a lot of presentations and we only have 3 minutes. If we could comment on every presentation, it would probably take 15 minutes just to do that. But I'm going to stick to it. And I wanted to follow up on what Doug said about the land use designations because I don't think he understood that those land use designations were developed to put in every community plan, and that's the big problem with them. The intent of the planning department was to use those for every community plan, but they're very vague, and they have statements in there like, quote, these uses should include, and then there's, and other uses. There's designations and other uses. So, the statement that David Good made about making open space more broad, I believe we need to go the opposite way. We need to have more specific land use descriptions because otherwise we don't know what's going to go in there. And we have a history in South Maui of rampant development with no regard for the environment, no regard for the drainage systems and natural drainage flows. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in today, because we have not paid attention to these things. We have not been specific about our land use designations. And as citizens, we don't know what's going in these different designations. When the planning department first came up with these designations, they had a couple of community meetings that I went to, and that's basically what they were told. But they haven't had one recently, and this community doesn't understand these land use designations, hasn't had a chance to dialogue. We're being fed information, and there's just not a chance to dialogue on this, for us to ask the questions. So that's a big issue, and I think you need to look closely. And I would hope that you would hold maybe a town hall so that the planning department could explain these designations again to our community and get some feedback on them. And by the way, the county council was 1 vote short of actually not accepting these land use designations for the West Maui Community Plan because we had some problems with it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this expansion of the plan development that Doug talked about across Kulani-Hakoi Gulch and across Waipuilani that is different from the original plan. So somehow these maps are getting changed and it feels like developer input that's changing it. It's not citizen input. You guys are here to represent the residents and the citizens and the community. And, we host the developers, but they shouldn't be the ones telling us what we want in our community. And I wanted to let you know that on October 5th of 2022, we had a presentation by Amanda Cording. Dr. Amanda Cording was hired by the county to come in and give us some alternatives to ecological alternatives to these drainage systems. Came up with some very good recommendations and information, and basically concluded that the original plan that the county had come up with to put Waipuilani and Kulani-Hakoi to converge those two was going to cost like $57 million. And she said, we can do that for less than $10 million. And I think the price that she gave us originally was $6 million, but that was a while ago, so it might be different. But I wanted to give you a little taste of her findings and recommendations from her presentation to us. And I can send you that presentation. She said, flooding is the result of past development and planning decisions. That's why we have all this flooding. We have not been paying attention to the development. The philosophy of keeping water where it belongs is ancient and important, meaning that the water should be able to flow where nature wants it to flow. And it can't right now because we've built too much. But as much as possible, the future development in Kulani-Hakoi needs to not impact the natural drainage flow and must be planned for stability for 100-year floods. She said there has been significant soil sediment in Kulani-Hakoi, which 2019 studies show have now changed the channel capacity. So before you expand this map, I would recommend going back to the original map, and let's take the next 5 or 10 years to do those studies. In that presentation, Public Works Director Jordan Molina told us that we need to do specific area studies on these gulches before we develop. So that's what I'm asking for too. She also said it is possible and desirable to avoid the convergence of Kulani-Hakoi and Waipuilani drainage flow. Biological solutions would be much cheaper than previous quoted expense. That's at $57 billion. And then I know my time's up, but I just wanted to conclude by saying you had some good presentations by developers who, I don't know if any of you actually live in Kihei. I know you work in Kihei. But I would request that you folks have equal presentations by the environmental groups that are also working in South Maui, like Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. There's several wetland restoration projects that should be allowed to present. Maybe the Kihei Community Association, the Ma'alaya Village Association, Dr. Amanda Cording, that would be an excellent
You're well
presentation
over 3
for
minutes.
you guys to hear. Okay, thank you.
Any clarifying questions for the testifier? Wayne?
Kelly, thank you for your public service during the time you were in office. You heard presentations about the urban sprawl about Pi'ilani tonight. Your thoughts and concerns?
My thoughts is that we should not be putting that into our community plan until we take care of the infrastructure below that area that we need right now. And so I'm not, I wasn't in favor of even going into design for the highway that they're talking about, the third highway, because all of these types of things are always distractions from our current infrastructure. We got to get the north-south collector road done. We've got to make sure we protect our wetlands. And by the way, that SMA that was given to the Makai Laie wetlands, it did not have a community hearing. It did not notify neighbors. I talked to Char Schulenberg. She got no notice about that. And somehow they got an SMA for that. So there's a lot of stuff going on that, I heard a good presentation by the planning department, but they're not following all of those procedures. So, no, let's stop going pie in the sky. Let's get real and let's service our current residents, because the current residents need infrastructure. And what we're doing is we're building for future residents. We're not ready to do that. We're not ready to house everybody on the island who wants to live here until we have our health and well-being taken care of. So, and that's my thought.
Kyoki?
Aloha, Kelly. Thank you for coming. And again, mahalo for your service. You briefly mentioned some of the challenges, during the vote on the West Maui group. Can you elaborate on some of that, or is that not able to?
Yeah,
what are some of the challenges that they faced?
Well, we wanted more specific descriptions of the land use designations, some of us, and we had a long discussion about that. And there were some community groups that came in and asked for the same thing. We didn't have the votes to change them, so that was challenging. We heard, some of us heard from different various groups that they weren't listened to or they weren't heard at the CPAC meetings. And I wasn't at all of them. I was at some of them, so I don't know how true that is, but that's some of the feedback we got from the public. And it's difficult because now that I'm a testifier, I see what people are talking about. It's like, you give us 3 minutes, you've given the developers 15 minutes, you're going to have an exchange back and forth with them later on, but there's never really an exchange with the environmentalists or the people who are trying to create our drainage systems, the ecological drainage systems that we need in the community, the people that are trying to build the infrastructure. And by the way, I'm working with Councilmember Cook's office and Pam Eaton of the MPO to put together a working group to start working on that transit-oriented corridor. So these things can move ahead even before we accept the community plan. But those are the challenges. Like, waiting for the community plan to be finished before you move ahead is a big challenge too.
Kyoki, and then Everett.
I'm sorry, Everett. Okay. So as far as community awareness, because I've been vocal about infrastructures needing to catch up. Mm-hmm. In my mind, which is just a little thing, it's hard to imagine building more when we're still catching up on stuff. So as far as and I think we all kind of know, but how can we do a better job of letting the community know about all this stuff? What kind of suggestions?
Yeah, well, doing virtual meetings would be the first step, so that more people could listen and contribute and testify. I think that would be good. Maybe holding some town halls on the specific issues. We were actually able, when they had the public meeting on the land use designations, those of us who were there, and that was probably 3 or 4 years ago, were actually able to ask questions of the planning department, have a dialogue instead of, most of this is one way, and, we hope we get asked questions, so thank you for that. But you don't get the bulk of the community. Look around them. Most of the people here don't live in South Maui. They care about it and maybe they spend time here, but the people who who live here and are raising families can't leave to come and sit here for 2 hours before they get a chance to talk, because they're home feeding their kids or they're working these hours, or it's hard for the average person to. That was a great thing about COVID, is it created that virtual, that avenue for us to participate and bring in the public. And this is one of the few boards and commissions that doesn't have it. All the other boards and commissions are offering it.
Everett?
Kelly, thanks for being here. I agree with you on the North-South Collector Road. How many years were you on the county council?
6.
How much of the North-South Collector Road got constructed during those 6 years?
This.
Thank you.
And when I was first, when my first term, I was on the MPO, and it was our top priority. So, and I was only on there for my first term, and then I did the climate committee, but then it dropped off. But somehow it wasn't the top priority anymore. And that's been really frustrating for those of us here.
Any other clarifying questions?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Next testifier.
Aloha, aloha, good evening, my friends. I thank you guys, my friends. Okay. I've been part of this community for 71 years, which is as long as I've been alive. Kihei was all Kiawe. We went hunting here. We went fishing down here, all the way from here down to Malaya, Makena, Wailea, and growth will happen. And I saw that happening in my lifetime when I saw Oahu being developed. There was no plans. There was nothing. People just went in the 60s and 70s and built. Wailea, basically the same thing. But then Cebu was smart enough to develop a plan. Hence, we got our resorts there. But some things that I'd like for you all to consider is, number one, if there is any way, brothers and sisters, if you guys could include in your descriptions that roads must be constructed prior to. Infrastructure is not only water, is not only electricity. The safety of our children and people like me, the old ones, we want to walk, we want to bike, but we can't. There's no sidewalks, there's no roads, the cars just zoom up and down. So that is one thing I want. Infrastructure, drainage. I live at the end of Ohukai, Mauka. I have the honor of being the neighbor to Haleakala Ranch, where my cousin has leased and raised cattle there for some years now. And now they're in the process of subdividing. And I'd be the first to tell you guys that behind my house, Haleakala Ranch, would be a very good place to put residential houses, not workforce, affordable, so that our children and our mo'opunas can afford to buy them. The infrastructure is there, but we need the roads to be put in place. We looked, somebody asked about an example for land designation use. You can come up Ohukai. We've got a new neighbor right across the street from houses where children play, where families live and dine outdoors or indoors. They've got a mess of trucks. Now they're coming up, this is the Hayes family. Their issue is coming up to the commission for approval of redirecting or rezoning. We cannot, when you talk about land use, you cannot put toxic chemicals across the street from where we live. And history will tell you it has caused damage to many families on the mainland, and we don't want that. We don't want that. Another thing I think is really important is the drainage. With Mauka being developed, And it's good to have a holistic plan for Mauka, South Maui Mauka, because it's going to happen anyway. But we know from our past experiences that when you uproot the earth, that's what causes the silt to come on down. I know most of you, if not all of you, live in our community, so I trust you. I thank you for your hard work. And keep in mind, our children, our kapunas, roads, infrastructure, drainage, safety for our children first. Thank you. I hear that bell going. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like you already have a question here from Mike.
Hi, Mike. My favorite guy. they're never going to let him retire from KS.
Thank you for coming so often and telling us the historical points of view. You mentioned a proposed development, I believe, is on Ohukai in your neighborhood, and you mentioned it was going before the commission. That's the Maui Planning Commission. I trust that you were saying.
Yeah, that I saw on the calendar. I get the agenda for the Maui Planning Commission, but it's not a development. See, the guy decided to go around, Mike, as he told you. He wanted to put a place just to park trucks. That's not true. There's toxic tanks going in there. The trucks, Mike, that come up, park in the middle of Ohukai until the gates are open and they can go in. That's not safe. That's not safe. He didn't want to build houses because it's too expensive, he said. But he will inevitably make some money out of that, and it's not about trucks, I can assure you. This is a developer who came from the mainland, bought this land from the Hayashi family, the Floros.
Okay. When I said development, I meant it's something that they're going to do, not that they were necessarily going to construct something, but as you said, they're asking for a zoning change.
Right.
And the planning commission meetings, which are online, so you can testify from home,
right,
as many others are. I believe that's next Tuesday morning. Mm-hmm. So do you intend to submit testimony for that as a nearby resident?
I will not only testify, I will submit 200 signatures. And most of them from little children, young men and women in our neighborhood and the streets down. Yes, I intend to be there, Mike. I got a question for you.
You can't ask us questions, we can only ask you. No, I just did want to mention that when you said about how we need all this infrastructure, we have that in our current community plan, infrastructure concurrent with development. But it's just that there's had been no enforcement of that. So that's the challenge that we have. We can put things in the plan, but if they're not enforced,
how can we enforce them? Perhaps that is something that you as a body could address and put it into our community plan. Put it into the plan on how, and a lot of development get around it. If your development is less than 15,000 feet, yards or whatever, so the Hayes is 14,999. So I called the planner, and he said, Sandra, it's in the ordinance. We can do that. I said, so you got just 1 acre more? And yet you got all this acreage that you bought. What are you going to do? And that's the Hayes family, Mike.
Wow.
Any other clarifying questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier.
Good evening. My name is Mark Hyde. I'm a resident of Wailea, and I've been involved in various community affairs, including land use planning. I want to correct one statement made about Wailea not having employee housing within the development. And I'm going to point out one great solution that exists at Hotel Wailea. It was built very early in the stages of Wailea, and they created in the back of the hotel, I think it's 25 condominium units, studios, apartments. And they have kitchens, there's a laundry facility that the employees can use, and they can literally walk from their condo to their job. And it serves the other purpose as welding those people, where a lot of restaurants have turnover and they can't get servers and all this. Well, guess what? If you can have an affordable unit right there in Wailea, it really works. 25 units. I recommend you go take a look. So it can be done. Maybe not so much in a housing environment, but where you have commercial, there can be opportunities like that, and it's real. The second thing, I'm intrigued by the discussion about small town development, because I've been scratching my head over that, and I've read the definition several times, and it is so vague to me, I don't know what it would allow. Plus, the definition says it can draw customers from outside the area, outside the neighborhood. So what is the intensity and what is the traffic that might entail? And what are the rules that will govern how that land is developed internally? I'm not here to talk about the Pi'ilani Promenade property. I'm going to talk about that at another occasion when we get to that land use map. But the reason I'm concerned about that definition and its specificity is that is on the draft map for the front two large parcels there that front Pi'ilani Highway. So this is going to be small town that can draw people from elsewhere, and the community was absolutely outraged when there was going to be a mega mall there. All the traffic, all the commercial activity that nobody was clamoring for. So now it could be small town, which is low to medium density commercial use. Well, does that mean drive-through restaurants? I don't know. But I'd hate to see it go from mega mall to mini mall after the community fought so hard for that change. And I think you need to tighten that language up, but there needs to be rules around it to define what does that mean in terms of intensity of those commercial enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions? We had Daniel first and then Vernon.
Hello, Mark.
Hi, Daniel.
Thanks for braving the weather to come here tonight.
It's pretty nice out.
You're a resident of Wailea, and thanks for bringing up that example of Wailea Hotel for their workforce. Are you aware of any other workforce housing that exists in Wailea besides that?
No.
I know you can't speak for your community, but do you think your community, those who live there, residents who live there, would welcome workforce housing in Wailea? You know, any kind of workforce housing.
That's hard to answer because I can't speak for a whole community of people, and I don't know.
If you speak for yourself, I guess the answer would be?
I think if you do it right, you know, it works very well. That's the only thing I can say, Daniel. I don't know. Nobody has ever complained about the housing at Hotel Wailea, and I'm proud of it. And I think there could be other samples. Now, whether people want to live there, you know, in the Wailea community is another matter. You know, would they be comfortable there? And I think they would be comfortable there. If you give someone a decent place to live at a good price, close to their job, that's a winner.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Mark.
I was trying to turn my mic on. So Mark, what would you want to see on the Piilani Promenade site?
Housing, housing, and housing. That's the need that we have. I don't know anyone clamoring for retail commercial. And incidentally, retail commercial generates a heck of a lot of traffic, much more than housing. It's much more intense at different times of the day. And so when you plug in these artificially, okay, how about, small town here and so forth, well, what are the traffic implications of that? And you don't even know because you don't know what's going to go in there, what the intensity is going to be. But I'll tell you this, that if you were to ask anybody on the street, what do we need in South Maui? I don't think anybody's going to say we need another mini mall. They all want housing.
So you were intervener, yeah, to that project. So it's not a mini mall, it's light industrial. It went back to the old 95 plan, right?
Well, yes and no.
So you're in contact with the developer?
Well, it's a very complicated conversation, but the way things stand right now is the Land Use Commission has order stands, and there was a stipulation and settlement made in 2020 that the owners committed to build a light industrial park there, but they don't want to build a light industrial park there. And I don't think the community wants a light industrial park there, frankly, because I think what we want is we want housing. And in fact, I remember at the mega mall hearings, KCA and many people said they came with signs and T-shirts. They said, we want housing. Well, guess what? I don't know that housing is really, something that's financially what the developers want to build. Probably not. They probably want to build commercial. This is probably a conversation we should have another time, Vernon, but you're right about the current status as far as the Land Use Commission is concerned. Now, I brought that to the attention of the Planning Department. I said, look, why did you put on the map some small bit of residential in the back and all this small town development in the front when you, as the planning director, are obligated under state law to enforce Land Use Commission orders? And the order says it's going to be light industrial. And the letter I got back was, well, this is up to the community to decide. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to decide, what you'd like to see there. And that makes sense to me.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're right, but there's more to that action too, so.
Question from Wayne.
Thank you, Mark. I heard you say tonight 3 times, housing, housing, housing. And I listened to the presentation by the people seeking entitlements, with the exception of Mr. Chan tonight. Nowhere did I hear them say that they were willing, seeking entitlements, and nowhere did I hear them say affordable housing. Any comments?
Well, what we need is affordable housing. That is such a crying need. I'm going to share a story with you. It's Wayne, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to share a story with you. I sat on a jury last fall, and on the jury there was a former principal of Lahaina Luna High School, and there were 2 teachers. And my son, incidentally, works at Maui High School. Teachers can't afford to live here. They can't recruit teachers to come here because they don't have an affordable place to live. So you got a young teacher out of school and they come here and they're probably inadequately paid to begin with, and then what? They got to rent a room in somebody's house. And what? They're 25 years old. They don't want to do that. And so they come for a year and they go. And then I hear these horror stories about, well, here's what they do. They don't have teachers to substitute. And so what do? They herd the kids into the cafeteria and give them something to do. And there's no teaching going on. I mean, it's an absolute crisis. And it's not just teachers, it's everybody. And, you know, it's just so critical, Wayne. We don't need all this other stuff. We need housing for people who live here. Anyway, that's my answer.
Any other clarifying questions? Thank you. Next testifier.
Good evening. My name is Dean Frampton. I'm testifying on item D3 relating to your maps. I'm the project manager for Honolulu Partners LLC, and I'm working on a project formerly identified as Wailea 670. I believe we'll be coming back to you in June or July when the sub-area of Wailea is brought before this committee. But I want to note that in 2008, the County Council gave our project, our project the project district zoning. And per Maui County Code, the intent of the project district zoning is to, and I'm quoting, provide for flexible and creative planning approaches rather than specific land use designations. Our project is currently mapped in your figure 3.15, and this project map includes designations for very specific uses. And generally, we are opposed to this level of specificity in the community plan map as it's contrary to the objectives of our project district zoning. And an acknowledgement to the previous testimony made and the calls for more specific clarification. I'd say that our project over the last 20 years has probably been vetted as thoroughly as it could be to this level. And I think for that reason, we would like to be considered under the definition that is in your map, or in your section for special purpose district. And the language in the special purpose district reads, for established project districts that do not easily fall within one or more of the community plan designations. It's for unique projects, I feel, where we are relatively unique. So for that reason, we'd like to ask the committee to consider adjusting the map in certain areas to allow for that project district designation. And we'd like to work with the department and this committee on those subtle changes. And finally, I don't want to end on a negative note, but if I did hand out testimony, if you could look at the second to last paragraph in my letter, I'd like the committee to consider the potential conflicts of interest that I've raised in that letter. And I thank you all for your time and effort in this process. Thank you.
Any clarifying questions to testifier? Thank you. Next testifier.
Aloha, committee. My name is Tina Rasmussen. I'm a 46-year resident of Maui. I do not live in Kihei or South Maui, but I have been working extensively in the Kihei community on a variety of projects over the last 4 years. This work that led the firm that I'm a partner in to conduct over 200 interviews and focus groups in Kihei for our projects. I came to this hearing tonight to just share with you one of the themes that was common throughout our interviews, regardless of what project we were working on. The theme centered around residents here frustrated with living in a community that was so haphazardly planned. They mentioned that infrastructure was sorely lacking in many neighborhoods, namely sidewalks, effective drainage, safe intersections, crosswalks, bike paths, etc. They mentioned that major infrastructure like roads and schools were decades behind the need, as evidenced by the long-delayed North-South Collector Road and the not-yet-open Kulani-Hakoi High School over 20 years in the making. So I felt compelled to share this with you tonight because I believe in long-range planning and in master plan communities. When these long-term visions and plans have been allowed to be carried out on our island, it really is a beautiful thing. I think Maui Lani, a community that has taken 40 years to develop and is still building out, is one of the best examples where proper infrastructure, sidewalks, parks, schools, convenient shopping, and housing for our working families are integrated to create an exceptional quality of life. So I was extremely pleased to see that the Department of Planning, under their new leadership, has included the entire Kihei-Mauka area within the growth boundary for this updated South Maui plan. This puts it in line with the Maui Island Plan and will allow for forward-thinking, long-range planning to provide the kind of growth that Kihei deserves. Well-designed, resident-focused, small-town designation. I urge this committee to support the planning director in this department update. Whether it be parks, the Parks Department is looking on where they should put new parks in the future, where if it's Public Works, looking for where they should put the new highway corridors, or the state looking at new schools that will be needed. Putting these growth boundaries on a map is critically important if the community wants to be proactive about their needs, and more importantly, the needs of the next generations that will be here 30 years from now. If you halt long-range planning, this community will be eternally catching up, playing catch up. That's my message. Thank you.
Any clarifying questions for the testifier?
Okay.
Thank you. Next testifier. Okay, going once, going twice. Closing public testimony at 8:03 p.m. Do we want to take a 5-minute break before we start our own? Yes. Okay, 5-minute break. Okay, find your seats so we can start. Okay, resuming the meeting at 8:11 p.m. So at this time, we are going to, so we're not making any decisions today, like I said earlier. We're just discussing, asking questions of our presenters, which is both from the planning department as well as the landowners. So the floor is open. We got Wayne, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, David Good. How's it? Where in your development is there space for another hotel? Where's the location?
Okay, Dave Good responding to Wayne. We don't have any hotel zone property.
I thought you mentioned this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all a residential, apartment, or business zone.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
What is the situation with the mayor coming to speak to this committee?
I believe that, all the elected officials and the mayor and the cabinet have an open invitation to all of the public meetings. As far as a specific request from the CPAC members for him to explain his stance on affordable housing, again, I can't speak to that at this point in time, and I think it's something that all the departments are involved with helping solve, and not just specifically the mayor. As you probably heard, over the last number of months, and with various candidates during elections, I think that's a profound issue that everybody's trying to solve for, especially this community members tonight have heard that from even the developers. Housing's going to be a hot topic, but I can follow up again to see if there's a time that the mayor would intend to come or plans to come. I can't speak for him though at this point.
So last week I talked to Karen about that and asked that she try to invite him for 2 weeks from today.
If I may,
Go ahead.
does long-range planning have any ideas on where you'd like to see more housing put in this area? Site specific.
I don't believe we've had any specific location that we've been earmarking as affordable housing. I think we've acknowledged there needs to be housing of various income levels throughout the entire district. But as far as aligning a certain property or TMK with housing, again, it's not something the department has been precisely saying this will be the affordable housing site. But it is an issue for the whole district, I think.
Mike, go ahead.
Okay, going all the way back to the beginning when we heard from the planning department, you mentioned about the categories of SMA, and you said there's one other, but it's not actually a category. It's when someone is exempted from an SMA. Could you address if does that ever happen in your knowledge that unless some entity is granted an exemption from an SMA?
So that actually happens quite a bit. Hawaii revised statutes, which establishes the special management area and the coastal zone management area, it lists what type of projects require permits, and it also lists what type of projects do not require permits. And so that's what we call the exemption. So for example, something that can be exempt is, a single family dwelling and then an accessory dwelling. So when somebody builds a house, say in South Maui, it's an SMA, that gets an exemption. Of course, there's a certain size that the Hawaii revised statutes requires it to be bumped up to a special management area major permit, and that's 7,500 square feet. Other things that can be exempt are things like interior repairs or maintenance to existing structures. So there are quite a bit of exempt projects that occur. And just, having said that though, the department, even if something can be considered exempt, if we feel that there's a lot of impacts, that is something that, the director can determine to bump up to a major permit and have, Maui Planning Commission review.
Okay, just to follow up on that, an issue has come up, and it's within government where we have a situation in North Kihei where sidewalk was supposed to be built concurrent with a new, I guess we'll call it affordable housing. And the condition was that the developer was required to build the sidewalk on one street, and county, Department of Public Works, was required to build it on another street. Well, the result was the developer did it. He built this sidewalk, and the Public Works still hasn't even begun to do it, and that was the rationale. Well, they didn't get an SMA permit. Now, I don't know whether you would have, I guess who would make that decision, but it seems to the community that is this something, would this be a reasonable situation for the planning department to say to the Public Works Department, okay, we'll give you an exemption on this SMA to build this little strip of sidewalk for community safety? It's pretty specific, but if you could address it. Thank you.
That's a good question. So we're applicant driven, meaning, we can't make somebody else do something. So if Public Works needs to come in for a sidewalk, once they come in, we can assist them and try to be as expeditious as possible. But until they do, there's nothing for us to review or process.
Mahalo.
Vernon?
Hey, Danny. For the evaluation part, You get a lot of the $499,099 kind. You know what I mean? And the
Yeah,
bugger just short
yeah.
$1 and the bugger becomes minor.
Yeah,
Do you plan any
that
that kind?
happens. I'm sorry.
You get a lot?
I wouldn't say a lot, but that happens. Yeah.
Okay, one more question. And for Ryan, you know, so Leilani gave her spiel, yeah? Any chance we can get the specific of what Leilani gave? Because it would help. Oh. Okay. No, I don't think we can read them. Okay, now I'll go check. That's all.
Okay, I have a bigger question, and then I'll hand it off to you, Cody. So this is for all the developers, actually, but primarily for those who are south of Kilohana. We had a long discussion 2 weeks ago about how to get the remaining road widened, Pilani Highway down to Wailea, and we didn't reach a conclusion. And so, and obviously, as everyone knows, the idea was that the developers would get that done as development happened or before it happened in Wailea. So since we weren't able to figure it out, can you guys give us a lead on what would make it happen?
Dave Good here, because Ryan's looking at me to answer. Well, I can't speak for McKenna or Honua'ula, so I think as a reminder, there's 3 parties that have some obligations to expand Pi'ilani Highway to 4 lanes in that area, right, from Kilohana to Waileiki Drive. And Honua'ula's commitment in zoning is to do the whole thing. Wailea's commitment through some change in zonings that happened in the late 90s is to do its pro rata share. And McKenna's commitment from its change in zoning in, I don't know, ever 2009-ish, said to do its pro rata share. So that all falls really on the State Department of Transportation to figure that out, right? What's our pro rata share in Wailea or McKenna and Honua'ula? In Wailea's case, we have an agreement because we're farther along, quite frankly. McKenna's has a much longer development time frame. Honua'ula is anxious to start, but they haven't started anything. So in order for Wailea to determine its pro rata share, it was necessary to just have some arrangement to figure it out. And so that was done. And there's an agreement with the Department of Transportation. And it's triggered when there's a certain number of units that are done at a certain time. And we're actually getting fairly close to that time. But that would only be a portion of the work. So ultimately, what I'd like to do, Chair, in answering your question is give me a couple weeks to come back with something. If you're anxious to get some kind of language that might work, you know, maybe I could dream something up that would work. But ultimately, it's a state highway. Right, and I think your committee's had issues before, like how do you direct the state, right? So I'd leave it at that.
Just a follow-up question. So if you're getting close to where your pro rata share is being met, so part of the widening will happen, does that work like one segment, or how does that work? Like 1/3 of it, or 1/4, or something?
Yeah, so it's based on traffic studies, and so I think everyone would acknowledge that the major traffic jam in that area is the northbound heading towards Wailuku, Pauhana traffic, right? And it starts at whatever, 3:30 to 4:35. And so the hotels come out at different times. I mean, Brian Ward lives right there. You can tell exactly when it is. And so that is compounded by the intersection at Kilohana. So when you go, if you're going Wailuku bound and you go through Kilohana, you go about 800 feet and all of a sudden, boom, you get 2 lanes. So that 2 lanes needs to move back towards Wailea to help get folks through that intersection. So that's what our work entails. In a nutshell, it's to mitigate the worst part of that 4-lane section and get it kick-started. But it's not chump change. It's like a $7 million project.
But it can happen before the other 2 catch up.
It's possible, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cody, next.
So this is for Danny. if a new development with an entirely new scope of work is trying to redevelop over another development, like, so an example, the Hilton and the Maui, and should that not require, if it's a whole new scope of work, should that not have required an EIS? Being that the original EIS was done like in the 80s or 90s, early 90s.
That's a pretty hard question to answer without knowing the specifics. I'm not, an expert on the EIS process, and that's something that's administered by the state. I do know that sometimes, they'll look at what was previously proposed, and although it can be different, if they consider that the impacts are relatively the same, then they might determine that, a new one is not required. But,
Even if it feels like in an SMA area?
Correct, yeah.
And then the other question I had was basically to everybody testified, or gave presentations, sorry. But have, hardly heard too much about the water, heard some talk about the R1 usage, but is there an estimated amount that you guys know of water that will be used for these projects? And do you know where that water is coming from? And if so, have you reached out to the families and the communities of those areas?
I'll go first for that one. This is Ryan Churchill for my research in Tech Park. As Leilani mentioned, it's a combination. And so our near-term projects are County of Maui water, the system that already exists and kind of stubs out to these properties. And as she mentioned, we're have an obligation to expand the tank size above the Tech Park there. So that's coming from the County of Maui system, which is Central Maui water system. And no, we haven't reached out specific to families of the Navaeha waters and discussed that with them. The second source is it's a private system, Highlands Water System, it's known as, and that's a RO system with a well, or 2 wells above the Tech Park that treats the water and comes down through the Tech Park now. And then the third source, which Leilani mentioned, is the non-potable water from the Kihei treatment plant. And so there's currently a 10-inch R1 line that comes up to the Tech Park now, and that's going to be expanded with a redundant 16-inch line that we've been working with Department of Environmental Management to bring through the Tech Park and continue down to connect to the high school and continue to the north to serve properties to the north. And so that's in design, and we're in collaboration with them to potentially upsize the line and make sure all the properties within the Tech Park are using R1 water, as they do now. Every property in the Tech Park uses R1 water, and it's amazing when you look at the statistics of how it reduces the potable water demand by having R1 water available.
Sorry, what was the other source of water besides?
It's called the Highlands Water System.
Highlands?
Yes.
Hi, Cody, thank you for the question. Rory Frampton here. Being a little repetitive, we're a very long ways off, but we did do preliminary numbers. I don't have them in front of me right now to look at water demand. Potential water sources, ideally, it would be the county water system. When we're ready to build, which would be a long ways off, if they have capacity. In my view, I think it's better to have everybody on one major system, regardless of where the water source comes from. It just makes more sense as a utility. But rather than having separate private systems all throughout the island, that's just my opinion. But if the county water system is not available, both ranches have drilled a well up Mauka at about the 600-foot elevation. They've tested it It is usable. It's slightly brackish. It would be very similar to the Highland system, where they'd have to run it through an RO to remove some of the salts and stuff and treat it. So as a backup plan, they do have a capacity to have wells to the groundwater and to treat it and to use it for potable water source. Or if they could do that as for the non-potable system. That well could be available for non-potable system, or in the future they're talking about bringing the R1 line all the way down that way to the Monsanto plant that's right above Veterans Highway, because they use 500,000 gallons a day of potable water that could be freed up for potable use if the R1 made it all the way to their farm. So there's a couple different options, but that's my, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Cody, for the question. So for Wailea, our water source, our water, basically we are hooked up to the DWS system. We are part of the DWS service area. Wailea was one of the original joint venture partners, was actually the majority partner in bringing the water to Kihei, Wailea in the 70s. So we've built 3 water tanks, all the water lines, et cetera. We are beginning our draft EIS process, and part of the draft EIS is a cultural impact assessment. That assessment is getting initiated basically as we speak. I'd have to check with our consultants if some of the folks in the valley are part of that, but if they're not, they should be. And if needed, maybe we could work with you to make sure that they're invited or that they want to participate. But that will greatly inform our overall EIS and our cultural impacts. Thank you.
Hi, Cody. Thanks for the question. Of course, if there was county water available, we would consider and discuss with the county if that was a possibility. But beyond that, we have 9 brackish water wells that we use to irrigate our golf courses. Those have a pretty significant capacity in current usage, and if county water was not available, along with potentially using R1 for irrigation purposes and non-potable uses, we would ensure that all of our potable uses were captured within the current usage from our wells and through a reverse osmosis plant.
And do you guys have an estimated amount of usage for that R1 water?
Currently, we use between 2 and 3 million gallons per day.
Mahalo.
Okay, so I saw this day come a long time ago where eventually we're going to be tapping the wells Mauka or for projects. I always have known, or we always have said, the ones that lived here for a long time that get plenty of water in South Maui, because of the springs below. The concern I had, like even from the get-go, from the Hilton project, they tap into 2 wells at Hilton, and in the high school, I think they have two wells. And is there any more up there, Bryce, right now, or this be the first one for the high-tech park? There's 2 already. So this just coming from the Nana'au Kanaka view. So those wetland ponds below, behind Long's Drugs, they've gone dry. Even when it was raining Mauka. Part of that water system that comes up from Mauka gotta go to those areas and gotta get to the ocean. So it is what it is, but how you manage how much water needs to come down flow, right? Because by depleting the resource, the springs, those waters that no reach the shoreline, it's not a good thing. But it is what it is. That's where we're at right now. But I know it's going to be hard to how you figure out how much water you use from on top, and then you got to use some from the county. But the R1 water does help, because at Lokilani School, we just go to town and use as much as we can. It's a lot cheaper. It reduced our domestic water bill by a lot. So it helps us in that sense. But I just like you guys be aware, whenever you guys do projects inland and you tap the wells, we're depleting that natural resource that needs to reach the ocean. That's all.
Wayne, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to the three gentlemen sitting in the corner there, I don't know if you've been given carte blanche. Are you able to answer if you are given entitlements that you would be able to build workforce housing on your property with the entitlements? Not you, Mr. Chan, or you, Hawaiian Homes.
Thanks for the question, Ryan Churchill. And again, to clarify, for the Maui Research and Tech Park, it's fully entitled. We're in for subdivision permits, construction plan approval, and that's proceeding. And yes, we have workforce housing as part of it. Our target range is 80 to 120. As Mr. Good mentioned, there's been significant housing in the last few years in the sub 60% income bracket. And there's a project that's just opening at the bottom of the tech park. Now we're not involved with, but the Halelea project, I think it's going to be about 120 units. That's all sub 60% also. So our units will be in the target is the 80 to 120% range, and we have a requirement for 100 of those to be rental, and that's where Leilani mentioned we hope to have move in 2026 timeframe.
We haven't developed our specific unit counts or spreads, but the project is intended to provide primarily resident housing. So there's going to be a significant portion that are, quote, affordable in that project as we see it.
Thanks. Dave Good here again. Good question, Wayne. I think as I mentioned in my presentation, we intend to, I'm going to say add workforce housing to Wailea beyond the 25 units that Mr. Hyde mentioned.
Kilke and then Daniel.
Thank you. This question is directed towards planning. Auntie Zandra's presence tonight has reminded me of, you live the county homes, yeah? You live the county home project? Auntie Zandra? You live the county homes project, yeah? Right. That was early 90s? Early 90s, yeah? So the county homes project, I was a young adult at the time, not ready to purchase a home, but that helped a lot of families with what eventually became my wife. Her family benefited from a property over there. So my question would be, is this type of county housing project something that can be considered in the very, very, very near future, or have we outlived that concept and cost and all this kind of stuff? Anybody from planning? You guys looking around like, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but.
I'm going to sound like I'm punting, but I have to. So when it comes to county-type housing, that falls under the Department of Housing and Human Concerns.
Sure.
So we would work on, permitting or assist in that case, but they're the ones that do the, the proposals and decide, like what projects they want to pursue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Something like that I would be really, really in favor for, because I know from living it and seeing how it benefited families. It helped a lot of people. Yeah, Mahalo.
Daniel?
I'm glad there's a representative from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands here. So this question is for Julianne. How many beneficiaries have been awarded land or parcels on Maui? Approximately. Oh, can you speak into the mic, please?
I
Thank
can
you.
add, I can, give me a little bit of time, I can add them up. I should have actually have these numbers on another slide, but can you give me a little time and I can give you the exact number?
Okay. The other question is, how many are on the wait list for Maui?
Yeah, so I will give you those exact numbers because I knew those questions would have come up. Just give me a little bit of time.
Are you looking it up now, or are you gonna?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I have to look it up on,
Okay, while you're looking that up, I'll go on to somebody
Thank
else
you.
and come back to you. So, hi Brian, good to see you. Mr. Churchill. So the R&T Park is the total units that you're entitled to build, is it still 1,250? Yes. Are you planning to go beyond 1,250?
Excuse me. Right now, I think we'll be less than that. We're looking around 800 within the residential zoned area.
And who are the principals of the R&T Park? I mean, who owns it?
It's a Goodfellow family. So Pacific Rim Plan, Goodfellow brothers.
And Pacific Rim?
So Pacific Rim land is owned by the Goodfellow family.
So it's the Goodfellow brothers?
Yes.
Okay. Local developer. That's
Yes.
where that comes from. Okay, and Julianne?
Let's give her some more time.
You're calculating?
Let's give her some
Okay.
more time. Let's give her
Maybe you
some
can
more
go
time.
on to somebody else to ask
Yeah.
a question and then come back to me.
Yep. This is a unique opportunity. You can ask all the questions you want of the major developers in South Maui, so don't be shy. You guys are never shy. What's wrong here? Yeah.
Yeah, there's two guys, they quiet tonight. Yeah, Ryan. Trying to find your name. Ryan. So, mixed use, yeah? Leilani shared about mixed use. Affordable homes in that mixed use. And where that number start?
Yeah, so it's probably going to be in the 100 to 200 unit range.
Oh, no,
The pricing?
Yeah, the pricing.
Well, so the pricings will be set by the county of Maui.
Oh, that, okay.
In the affordable housing table for if it's in that 80 to 120 bracket for rental.
And is it fair to say this is part of the Lipoa, whatever, project?
Yeah, yes, correct.
Yeah, just the only reason why I like going up there is because my wife work at the school and get Maui brews. If no more that too, I'm not gonna go up there, right?
Well, our ultimate goal is to have it where you can live up there, work up there, and also eat and drink up there too.
Yeah. Well, that's the goal. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Randall?
Yes, just a general question regarding the Show Me the Water is how does the sewer component play into the water?
I'll defer to David because he's probably the expert from his prior job.
Thanks, Ryan. I don't consider myself the expert. Mr. Leach, is your question related to like sewer capacity or the R1? Can you expand a little bit on your question for me?
Or just where does it go?
Okay, so sewer lines? Okay, so all the sewer lines basically, they work their way down, towards, say, South Kihei Road, and then through a series of pump stations get pumped up, which is basically Old Wellakahau Road to the Kihei treatment plant, which is on the far south end of the Maui Nui Golf Course. And from there, it gets treated to an R1 quality water, which is Not considered drinkable, but very usable and good for plants, et cetera. The Maui Nui Golf Course is irrigated 100% with that water, so is, like Ryan was mentioning, the R&T Park. And those lines actually distribute all the way down to Kalama Park. So there's a number of areas that are used, but not all the R1 water is consumed. They still use injection wells, which they're trying to wean themselves off of by finding more users. So ultimately, the goal is to have a complete cycle so that water is reused, and if possible, reused where currently potable water is being used is the goal, because that frees up potable water for other uses. Is that good enough?
Yeah, Ryan Churchill. For the tech park, we're a little unique. It's a private transmission system, and because we're Malka, the highway, so our transmission line stays above the golf course and goes directly into the treatment plant. And then the R1 water, after it's treated, goes up to 2 tanks and then comes back to the tech park. If you have not had DEM share their R1 maps with you and their plans, I think that's a great thing. If you may have already done that, but it's fascinating to see where the R1 water goes now, where the usage is, and in projects where it's used, how much smaller the domestic potable water use is in those neighborhoods.
Okay, ready, exciting.
I have my numbers. So for residential leases, we've awarded 1,250, and for agricultural is 64, and pastoral leases is 75. The residential ag and pastoral. Now on the other end of that is the applicants. So for residential, our wait list for the island is 3,934.
8,000?
3,934. And for our ag wait list, it's more. So it's 4,734. And for pastoral, it's much less at 631. So that's the existing lessees and our wait list for the Maui Island.
Okay, just a clarifying question. Then for the Pulehunui parcel, the 746-acre parcel?
The 646-acre parcel, yeah.
Oh, okay, 646. You said that you could potentially put 80 to 100 ag lots in that?
Subsistence ag lots, they're smaller, they're under 3 acres.
Subsistent ag lots?
Yeah, it's a new lease that we have.
Okay.
So it's like a little scratch, a little dent,
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because I think the Department of Hawaiian Homelands can do a lot to alleviate the housing crisis for locals, our local residents, because this is for Kanaka, Native Hawaiians who qualify, right?
Yeah.
So if you remove those waiting from that list, then you remove that also from folks wanting affordable housing, which opens up more opportunities for other people to get affordable housing.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
So I think the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is a critical player in addressing the housing problems that we have here. Do you agree?
Yes, and that's what we've been saying, yeah. No, and in Maui has been good. I think it was West Hawaii. They just passed, I think, an ordinance that said that they would help us with our infrastructure. Help fund us. So that's really good when the counties step up and really make it that much easier to develop in their counties.
And just one last question for you is, for the Hawaiian Homelands beneficiaries, don't they have highest priority for water?
Well, the highest one, Kuleana, taro
Kuleana.
farmers, but, we're right there.
You're right under
there.
Kuleana, right?
Yeah.
So high priority, so that water wouldn't be an issue for these lots, right?
Yeah, in fact, I was trying to answer the water question here. I wasn't sure whether we had already got our reservation for water for our projects, but, water is going to be the constraint there, so we had to deal with that first. Yeah, so we go to the commission and get a reservation of water.
So thank you. I think many people here this evening are key to solving our affordable housing, our housing crisis on Maui. See how long the list is, right, for Kanaka, thousands and thousands. That's just Kanaka.
Yeah.
So affordable housing is definitely a huge need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Julie. So, I was in the early discussions for this project, and the water was always number one. I know you guys had somebody in the department trying to help. How you guys gonna solve the water? You guys still not there yet, right?
Yeah, I'm not up to stuff with that, and I would hate to give you folks the wrong information, so I can't comment on that.
So here my struggle. I put in my paperwork 86. I'm still waiting. The guys that come to these meetings, 90% of them, they beneficiary that get in place already. They the ones who put their manao in that PICO plan, not the guys that still waiting. So I stopped coming, to the meetings. So I'm still waiting. The other question is, can I buy these ag lands? Can I purchase it?
You cannot, because we can't, the land is not, we can't sell the land, nobody can sell the land, nobody can buy the land, right? But what people buy is improvements on the land, right? So if you build a house, that's how people are buying their lease. If you build a house, that's your improvement, basically, and so that's your property, and then you can sell that.
Mm-hmm. So ag
But
lands.
you can't sell the land, yeah. So if you're doing land, if you're doing
So 2 acres, keo. What was it? 400,000, 450,000 for 2 acres from a beneficiary. That's, I can buy them, right, from the beneficiary.
If they didn't put, they changed the rules now because people were doing that. It didn't make any sense that they haven't done anything on the land, and they're basically, capitalizing on it. We don't get anything. We're not involved in that transaction. So now you cannot sell your land if you cannot sell a vacant land. If you have improvements that you built on there, then you could do that. But if you're just selling ag land because, you have an ag lease, you can't do that anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Wayne.
Julie, the rule reads, whether they live on Big Island, Kauai, Niihau, Maui, or Oahu, if your name comes up on the list to qualify for a lot or ag lease, residency doesn't count. Is that true?
Residency, you mean?
To be a resident of Maui doesn't count.
No, you have to be on the Maui Island wait list, though. So we have wait lists for each island. And so that's what we go by. And, but you don't have to be necessarily a resident on Maui to be on the Maui wait list. You just got to sign up for the Maui wait list. And then this is, by the way, a problem because they sign up, say you're 18 years old and you sign up. And then you got to wait 30 years to get a lease. And then at that point, when you're 18, you thought you were going to be on Maui. But you find yourself at 60 on Oahu, right? And so that's a problem. So because you cannot accept the lease if you're not going to be on this island, right? So it's, and if you change lists, then you have to go to the bottom of the list. So people don't understand that it's by island, and I'm hoping for a rule change because that doesn't make sense to me. It should be just by, order. But right now it's by island, and you don't have to be a resident to sign up for that island.
To Mr. Chan, do you guys plan to build any affordable housing? I know you're family-owned, and I don't know if you get to call the shots.
Well, Wayne, thanks for the question. We're not sure that we're planning any changes to our property quite yet, but if, in collaboration and partnership with the community, we do ultimately propose anything, then absolutely, yes, our intention would be to build affordable and workforce housing as part of our program.
And Mike, and then Cody.
Mahalo to all the presenters this evening. They gave us all this information about potential projects. And I'll specifically address the three musketeers who are sitting together over there. You're all very experienced professionals. So I would like you to tell us your vision of, this plan is supposed to be for 20 years. So how do you see the transportation infrastructure in 20 years, not only from your project, but from what the community is going to face here? As a non-professional, it seems to me in 20 years, South Kihei Road will not be a viable road. There may be little segments left, but part of it is already deteriorating. The North-South Collector Road, we may get also like that. We may get some segments built, but it's not going to be a through road. Maybe 10 years we'll get a few segments in. So that leaves the Pialani and potentially another road. How do you see it in the next 20 years? What will happen to our transportation infrastructure? We'll say south of the North Kihei Road. So just get your perspectives, please. Any order you choose. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Ryan Churchill. From a regional perspective, that north-south collector road's got to be built. And I know the question came up earlier, but it's embarrassing that it hasn't been built and nothing's happened basically on the section going north the last 10 years. The county's kind of been looking at it, but there's been no specific SMA or EA. I know there's exemptions going through the legislature to help with that. The design isn't complete, and just nothing's been done. And then going south, the same thing. And so I think from a community perspective, there needs to be a lot more input and pressuring from the political side to get this stuff done. I don't think you're waiting around 10, 15 years for an extra $10 million for federal money is a waste of time. The county should just allocate the money and get it done. It's so critical. You have a large roundabout that's just been done and built, and you got to go all the way down to South Kihei Road instead of picking up what should be a north-south collector road and distributing traffic. So long-term, how I see it is that north-south's got to get done going both ways, at least the next two segments, as soon as possible to have that circulation. And then for what we're doing is it's not going to be a bypass freeway, but it's an additional collector road, which is Ninau Street, which, just last year we built another 1,200 feet of it. We got another 800 feet that's permitted going to the south, and will eventually go towards the wastewater plant, and is using what we're doing then to connect and just have that overall circulation. So you have, kind of 3 or 4 parallel roads for drivers to move around on to get where they need to in South Maui. And then the last topic is housing. Is have a housing where people work. I don't know what the numbers are, what the Wailea resorts track, where their workers live, but I'm sure a great deal of them are commuting in and commuting out every morning. And so I think the more housing opportunities there are in South Maui, that'll cut down on that amount of traffic at least coming in through the north side of Kihei. So that's sort of high level, some comments to address your question. Either of you?
Thanks, Mike. It's a great question. David Good here for the record. 20 years goes by pretty quickly. I mean, it was 20 years ago, well, 23 years ago, they went from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, right? And at that time, at 2 lanes, it was a parking lot at times. And yet there's all kinds of advancements in technology, advancements in automobile technology. Hopefully there'll be advancements in transportation, general transportation technology, more opportunities to walk, bike, I think is all part of the solution. There's more people working at home. Of course, a lot of people don't work at home. They got to get to work. They got to pick up kids. They got to go do their errands. So I guess I would like to echo some of Ryan's comments, mostly all of them. We need options, and right now we don't have many road options. And even when I was with Public Works, I was always a proponent of having another road, another connection. Because as you know, all you need is one accident on Pi'ilani or one accident on South Kihei Road, and we can't handle. So having options, so whether it's like the road he described, he now finishing as much of the north-south collector as you can. I think now the county's financially in a position where they can afford it, whereas they couldn't 5-10 years ago. Just allocating those resources and giving people options. And finally, housing. If you can live here, work here, most of the time you still got to go to Costco, you still got to go to town for a baseball tournament, whatever. That's fine. But if you have more options here to live, work, that's great.
Thanks, Mike. I would echo all the comments made. I'm a real big proponent of options. You know, funneling everybody onto one roadway just doesn't make sense. And that's what you got to do with Pi'ilani Highway right now, is to do, even to go to the store from North Kihei to get to the shopping center, you got to get on the highway. That's just ridiculous. So hopefully the north-south collector road will be built, and hopefully that'll lessen some of the load on Pi'ilani Highway. Ryan mentioned earlier some of the intersection improvements that can be done that will make Pi'ilani Highway more efficient. And I don't know if you mentioned the traffic synchronization that you guys have to do to some of the lights. Hopefully get the lights working more coordinated. The 4 lanes south of Kilohana, as Everett talked about last time, and David mentioned earlier, there's people who are on the hook to do that, but their projects have been held up, and specifically the Honua'ula project's in litigation, so that's not going to, they're not, if they were out of litigation, if they had a real project, then they would be looking at putting in that roadway. And I think above the highway, the south connection to Pi'ilani Highway, possibly through Kanani or Welakahau, would provide a nice connection through the MRT park, just giving people more options so they don't have to put all that stress onto Pi'ilani Highway. I think it's going to make a lot of sense, and there are some improvements that will be happening in the next 20 years that will hopefully relieve some of that stress on Pi'ilani.
Mahalo, Dylan.
So it's over 9, it's past 9, so are you guys interested in finishing? Yeah. Cody?
I just really wanted to add some mana'o. When I was talking about the water earlier, you know, there's a really popular Hawaiian saying, "E nanai ke kumu." Have you guys ever heard that? So it means to look to the source, yeah. And, you know, when you had the Department of Water Supply here, and they did their presentation, they're talking about how right now we have adequate water, but the way we're using the water right now, we're in danger of losing it. And so when I say look to the source, it's really about understanding where the water is coming from, not just the Department of Water, but where is the water being pulled from? Where are the communities that are being affected by the water? For me, I've worked in the taro patches in Waihe'e. I understand what it is for families to use the water as a priority. And so we're always taught, when you come to the Tower Patch, ever expect the water to be in the Tower Patch. Look to the source. So while we live here in Kulakai, we turn on our faucets, we get water, yeah. But it's really understanding where the source of that water comes from. And if you really want to communicate with the community like you're trying to communicate with us, I would advise you communicate with those communities as well. Mahalo.
So are we ready to finish for today? That our visitors off the hook. Thank you guys for coming and presenting, and also for staying all the way to past many people's bedtime. And calling the meeting closed at 9:04 p.m.